Confirmation vote for Pete Hegseth, President Trump's pick to run the Defense Department. At least 2 Republicans saying they plan to vote against the former Fox host, who has faced accusations of sexual assault, alcohol abuse, and misconduct. Will he have enough support? Plus, President Trump touches down in California to tour fire-ravaged areas and meet with those affected after speaking with hurricane victims in North Carolina. Meanwhile, the president is signaling he may eliminate FEMA while threatening to withhold aid to millions in California. And
if you don't like a particular politician, you can vote them out of office. But how do you vote Vanderbilt or Carnegie or Rockefeller out of their position? You can't. They can shape politics, get tariff policy in their favor, get labor laws stymied.
Could wealth inequality, an uncertain middle class, and promises of a golden age be signs we are in a second Gilded Age? I'm Phil Lipoff in tonight for Linsey Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us. Just moments ago, President Trump touched down in California as he prepares to tour the fire damage there. He was met by Governor Gavin Newsom, as you see. The two have a long history, a war of words, but of course, from a distance. Today, the two spoke face to face shortly after Trump landed.
Most importantly, thank you for being here. It means a great deal to all of us, not just the folks in Palisades, the folks in Altadena that were devastated. We're going to need your support. We're going to need your help.
Trump has threatened to withhold disaster aid if California fails to meet certain conditions. The president flew directly from Asheville, North Carolina, where many are still recovering from Hurricane Helene. While in North Carolina, he pledged support for hurricane recovery, but also signaled he may make major changes to FEMA or even eliminate it if he can. All of this coming at a busy time for the Trump administration. 1,500 U.S. troops are beginning their deployment to the southern border just days after President Trump declared a national emergency there. And for the first time, military aircraft are being used to deport migrants. This C-17 transported more than 100 people to Guatemala today. We'll talk with the former FEMA administrator about the president's suggestion he'd shutter the disaster relief agency. And ABC's Melissa Adan is standing by in Los Angeles. But first, here's senior political correspondent Rachel Scott.
Tonight, President Donald Trump touring the destruction from the Palisades fire on a cross-country swing through the disaster zones, raising the possibility of eliminating FEMA altogether. The president promising immediate aid for North Carolina's recovery from Hurricane Helene, but creating conditions for California, insisting there needs to be changes to water management in the wake of the devastating fires, and for the first time, demanding state voter ID laws in exchange for disaster relief.
In California, we want them to have voter ID so the people have a voice, because right now the people don't have a voice because you don't know who's voting, and it's very corrupt. And we also want them to release the water. If they released the water, they wouldn't have had a problem.
Today, California's Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom greeting Trump on the tarmac.
I have all the confidence in the world we'll work that out.
The president has blasted Newsom's response to the wildfires, repeatedly pushing a false claim that all they had to do was turn on a valve to keep fire hydrants from running dry. Officials have said the water supply wasn't the issue, but the volume required to battle a once-in-a-generation fire event. Newsom today pushing back, saying conditioning aid for American citizens is wrong, adding California pumps as much water now as it could under prior Trump-era policies, and noting California residents already must show ID to register to vote. The president and first lady on their first domestic trip of Trump's second term, also visiting North Carolina, still reeling from Hurricane Helene.
They supported us in record numbers, and I'm supporting them in record numbers, too.
The president suggesting he may move to get rid of FEMA and have the states exclusively handle their own emergency response, though it would take an act of Congress to dismantle or reform the agency.
FEMA has really let us down, let the country down, and I don't know if that's Biden's fault or whose fault it is, but we're going to take over and we're going to do a good job.
And Rachel's in California with the president tonight. Rachel, what else is the president expected to do this evening?
Well, Phil, I'll tell you, just moments ago, we saw President Donald Trump flying overhead, just surveying the vast amount of damage that is in this area alone. Just take a look around me. This is just some of the damage that the president is expected to see while he's on the ground here in California, surveying these disaster zones. Sources tell me that the president is expected to take executive action to establish a task force that would review FEMA and make any recommended changes. But the bottom line here, despite President Donald Trump's claims of trying to eliminate FEMA, he does not have the authority to do that. That would require an act of Congress. Phil.
Rachel Scott in Los Angeles tonight. Rachel, thank you. ABC's Melissa Adon joins us now from Pacific Palisades, where the president will assess the fire damage. Melissa, earlier today, President Trump was critical of California's response to the fires, to say the least. Among many things, he blamed the governor's policies. Governor Newsom just signed a $2.5 billion relief package for L.A. What's the latest on that?
Yes, Phil. So far what we know, Governor Newsom did meet with Trump right on the tarmac. They shook hands. They vowed to work together. And by Governor Newsom also signing that aid package, that's just another show of resources that we need here for state funding. And then, of course, those federal funds that come from FEMA. I do want to point out, though, Phil, that just moments ago we did see that law enforcement come in. Press pool arrived, and the President Donald Trump did arrive here to Fire Station 69 in Pacific Palisades. Now, this fire station, the last what you're standing from all of this devastation as far as firefighting stations go. This is where now he's going to be making his remarks and also speaking alongside Los Angeles' Mayor Karen Bass, somebody else who also was asked if she would extend her invitation or allow President Trump to visit. Of course, she's also mentioned that she will work with the president. They want the federal support, of course, for the people. That is the focus here because, Phil, the road to recovery here is a lengthy process. So far, officials have basically highlighted a series of phase-by-phase process that goes from removing hazardous waste, working with the EPA for that, then with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. They have to physically then move that debris and find places for it. So there's so much to it before then families can start to rebuild. Phil?
All right, Melissa, thank you. I want to bring you these live pictures right now. The president, along with the First Lady, Melania Trump, out there in Los Angeles with California officials walking down a street there, touring the damage. The president was in North Carolina, as we mentioned, speaking to people who are still suffering from Hurricane Helene there. And then he flew right from North Carolina out to California. And Melissa just showed you, and we talked about those moments on the tarmac with California Governor Gavin Newsom. The two have had a long time war of words. The president has said some fairly, he's called Governor Newsom some names, but today what happened on the tarmac is what happens in a natural disaster. The president flies there, and the governor usually meets them, and they talk about how they are going to get people back on their feet. You can see the First Lady here hugging someone along that devastated street. Some of these folks were allowed back in to see the damage. The president will continue to do this, and we will continue to follow it for you. I want to thank Melissa Adon one more time. For more on the president's plans for FEMA, we're joined by former FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell. She oversaw the agency under the Biden administration. Deanne, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it. We are learning that President Trump is expected to sign an executive order to establish a task force charged with reviewing FEMA. But the idea of needing some reform in the agency is not really new. Managers under both Democratic and Republican administrations have suggested changes for some time. Explain where these issues are and what you think should be done.
Phil, FEMA has obviously been around for a very long time, but I would say that the role that we play in helping people before, during, and after disasters has continued to grow year after year, with an increase in the number of severe weather events that we're responding to, with our efforts to try to build resilience before a disaster happens, and then with the complex recoveries, once they do happen. And so there's always opportunity to continue to improve, and I think having somebody come by and take a look at it is not a bad thing. But I think that it's important to start the conversation with really understanding understanding what FEMA's role is also at the same time.
Project 2025, the Republican administration's plan produced by the Heritage Foundation, calls for a disaster deductible, reducing federal aid to states that fail to protect their communities against disasters. Interestingly, a similar idea was actually proposed by the Obama administration. Do you see any kind of merit in it?
Well, I think that we've had these conversations, as you said, back to the Obama administration, of when we've seen this increase in the number of disasters that we are supporting financially, is there a better way to do that? And I think this is definitely a conversation that needs to happen, but it needs to happen with governors. It needs to happen with the state directors, those that are relying on the support that FEMA provides, on the ability for FEMA to help coordinate the rest of the federal family, to understand where the challenges are. And I think my concern is that if we rush into something like this, those jurisdictions, those states that don't have as much capability as others will then not recover the way they should, and then they just become more vulnerable to future events.
I'm guessing you saw that in North Carolina today, the president was critical, to say the least, of FEMA's response under your watch. Wondering what your response is to that.
I think, again, there's just a general misunderstanding of the role that FEMA plays. During the response to Hurricane Helene, there was quite a bit of misinformation out there about FEMA not being on the ground, about FEMA not delivering commodities, all of which have been proven to be false. Again, I think that the conversation that needs to happen is recognizing the role that FEMA plays, and that's to coordinate the federal family, and that's to reimburse jurisdictions for the costs that they experience and incur as they're rebuilding, and being there right by the side of the governor and their teams as they're going through these disaster responses and recoveries.
And I'm just curious, finally and quickly, the president suggested today that he might even just get rid of FEMA somehow. Do you think that is the right move?
Well, who's going to do the coordination? Like, these federal agencies don't show up on their own. These federal agencies, like the Army Corps of Engineers, they show up because somebody is sitting next to the governor and says, I have a need. And then FEMA's able to mission assign them and bring them in. That's not going to happen organically. And so if FEMA's not going to be there to coordinate it, who is going to do that? And so I think those are the types of conversations that need to happen.
Understood. Former FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Phil.
And I want to bring you back. Are we going to go back to those live pictures? Yeah. The president continues to tour the devastated area out in Los Angeles. You can see him there. The First Lady just to his left. She's wearing that black hat. They are talking to residents there in Los Angeles who had their homes devastated by the wildfires. The president flew directly from Asheville, North Carolina, out to Los Angeles after he visited the Hurricane Helene devastation in North Carolina. And now he's there. He's met on the tarmac by California Governor Gavin Newsom. The two have not had the best history, but they are today talking about how to best get federal help to the people in California. I want to bring back in Melissa Adan, who is out in Pacific Palisades. Melissa, the president we know and the First Lady are touring the damage out there. We see the damage behind you where you are. Talk about the meeting on the tarmac and what happens now between the two people and the two agencies, the government of, the governor of California and the president of the United States.
Absolutely, Phil. Look, first and foremost, these are people's lives that have been impacted. These are families. This is a community here in the Pacific Palisades. Not only did some homeowners, they lost their home along with where they work, where their children go to school, the place that they worship. Businesses. It has just been a massive, massive impact, right? So when you look at it just right then and there, for what it's worth, for so many of these people that I've spoken with, when they talk about what is recovery, what does it look like with state and federal resources, they want help. Plain and simple. They want help however they get it from whoever they get it. And they expect that the state and the federal government will work together. So as to your point, Phil, what is it that we just saw right on the tarmac here in Los Angeles moments ago was exactly that. Governor Newsom shaking hands with President Donald Trump and vowing to work together. Those were the words that were used repeatedly throughout that brief conversation in that moment there when the press pool began to ask Trump questions. He said that in order for us to make a plan and and be able to find solutions, we must work together. So that is really clear. That is a positive sentiment, right, for the people here that are in need, because first and foremost, what we're looking at with all this devastation, you have to think about what the EPA has to go through, the hazardous waste that they have there that they're still sifting through. Then when it looks at the debris removal process, I mean, this is going to take so much energy, so much time, and so much money, right? So we have all that in place. State resources are also being thrown into this, but federal resources from FEMA, Phil, are so important. We see this with every natural disaster. I mean, there's still people getting aid from North Carolina and Hurricane Helene aftermath victims. They're still receiving federal funding. So just imagine here where you had more than 12,000 structures, that is thousands of homes and businesses, how long and how much of a road it's going to take for people to get their federal funding, their state support. And of course, that's when you also see, Phil, the nonprofits, the local communities, the churches, the people that pull in together, because this is going to be a long recovery.
And Melissa, I know you heard these comments today. The president slammed FEMA's response to these disasters, not just to the fire, but also Helene in North Carolina, saying he wants to leave the response matters up to the states. Can he do that? What will that take?
Exactly, Phil. So what we have seen from President Trump's stance, that's something that he has said for several topics, right? He always feels that it's something for, he wants states' responsibility. That's something that he and his platform goes for. However, when it comes to FEMA, he cannot just take FEMA away, right? If he creates this task force, as Rachel Scott was reporting, then that's going to need, if that task force decides, hey, we're going to either want to dismantle, or this is what the steps we're going to take with FEMA, that needs congressional action. So then we're going to have to wait and see what Congress does and acts for that. But in the meantime, FEMA is still funding people. They wanted me to make that message clear when I reached out to FEMA officials earlier today to ask, well, what is the process, or the latest, at least, for Southern California wildfire survivors? How does that look like? They told me they've received more than 100,000 applications for both the Pacific Palisades and the Eaton wildfires. So that's just so many thousands of applications that they've been going through. And at this point, nearly 19,000 of those applications have been approved. And that equals to, at this point, $42 million in federal funding that has been distributed to families. And Phil, we are only expecting that number to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. And Melissa Dunn in Pacific Palisades for us. And those live pictures we were just showing you of the president and the first lady is also in Pacific Palisades. Again, they are just touring some of the disaster area. It's so wide. It's such a wide swath. But he's talking to homeowners there. You can see him with the Make America Great Again hat on, and First Lady Melania Trump to the right of the screen. We'll continue to keep an eye on that this evening. Meantime, in just a few hours, President Trump's controversial nominee for defense secretary, former Fox News host Pete Hegseth, will face a critical Senate vote for confirmation. He just barely cleared the preliminary vote yesterday after Republican Senators Murkowski and Collins voted no. Jay O'Brien has the latest from Capitol Hill.
Tonight, Pete Hegseth, President Trump's controversial pick to run the Pentagon, hoping to be confirmed by the Senate, but by one of the narrowest margins for any defense secretary in modern history.
Pete's a very, very good man. I hope he makes it. I hope he makes it.
Hegseth, a former Fox News host and veteran.
We will reestablish trust in our military.
All Democrats expected to vote against him, and 2 Republicans publicly saying no. Senator Lisa Murkowski saying on top of allegations of excessive drinking and sexual misconduct, which Hegseth has denied, she questions his management skills and is troubled by his admission of multiple infidelities. Murkowski saying, I believe that character is the defining trait required of the Secretary of Defense and must be prioritized without compromise. Also at issue, Hegseth's comments that women shouldn't be allowed to serve in combat, a position he walked back in his confirmation hearing.
Yes, women will have access to ground combat roles, given the standards remain high.
But Senator Susan Collins saying she's not convinced his views have changed.
How tight do you think this vote is going to be?
Oh, it's going to be tight. 51's tight, and that's what it was yesterday. It could even be 50, who knows?
Jay joins us now from the nation's capital for more. Jay, senators are expected to vote on Hegseth tonight. What can we expect to see as this unfolds?
We'll keep an eye on if any other Republicans, Phil, join ranks with Murkowski and Collins and also vote no on Hegseth. As you saw us lay out there, if there's one more no vote, that means that Vice President J.D. Vance would have to come up to Capitol Hill, cast the tie-breaking vote, and it would still put Pete Hegseth over the goal line. He would still become the next Secretary of Defense, but it would be by a very narrow margin. But if there is a fourth no vote and no Democrats break ranks and join for Hegseth, which it seems like they won't at this hour, that means Hegseth would fail. Now, we're not tracking any public no votes at this hour who would join Murkowski and Collins, but certainly it would be a slim margin for Pete Hegseth. It would be one of the slimmest, as you heard us say there, for a defense secretary's confirmation in modern political history, Phil. These confirmations for secretaries of defense are usually done with broad bipartisan margins.
And Jay, we've reported extensively on the controversies surrounding Hegseth. We certainly know what will happen if the vote is no. But if he gets through and gets the position, what challenges will he face as the new Secretary of Defense?
Well, firstly, I've asked some Republicans if he gets enough opposition, but he still squeaks through, does that weaken him going into his job in the Pentagon? And they say no, but it remains to be seen if it would give him the political oomph he would need from that job. Another thing following Pete Hegseth is how does he enact this sweeping new order that Donald Trump wants in the Department of Defense, these sweeping changes to DOD policy and cracking down on diversity, equity, inclusion programs in the Pentagon and things of that nature. Pete Hegseth has said he's going to return DOD to its quote-unquote warrior ethos, but the reality here is, Phil, this is the largest employer in the country. It is a massive organization, and Pete Hegseth has never led an organization of this size. So there are certain Democrats who say that because of that, he's going to have his work cut out for him.
All right, Jay O'Brien from Capitol Hill. Jay, thank you. One of those Democrats joining me now, Democrat Connecticut Senator Richard Blumenthal, who was on the Armed Services Committee and questioned Hegseth at his confirmation hearing. Senator, thanks so much for taking the time to be here this evening. We'll get to those allegations against Hegseth in just a moment, but you're not voting to nominate him. What are your biggest concerns?
I'm voting against his nomination, and I expect most Democrats will, and of course, at least 2 Republicans, because he is the most unqualified candidate for a major position of consequence, particularly Secretary of Defense, who makes life and death decisions in recent history. Not only does he lack the managerial experience, in fact, what meager experience he had in managing organization was a disaster with the 2 veterans organizations he ran into ground financially. But these accusations of sexual impropriety and alcohol abuse seriously show his lack of character and competence. And I question whether he can be an effective leader of 3.4 million Americans dedicated to our national defense with a budget of $850 billion.
Senator, I'd like to play an exchange you had with Hegseth while questioning him during his confirmation hearing. Let's take a listen to it.
I assume you'd be willing to submit to an expanded FBI background check that interviews your colleagues, accountants, ex-wives, former spouses, sexual assault survivors, and others, and enable them to come forward.
Senator, I'm not in charge of FBI background checks.
But you would submit to it and support it.
I'm not in charge of FBI background checks.
What'd you make of that response to your line of questioning?
You know, there's a reason for his ducking and dodging that question, which is the more truth that emerges about his background, the weaker he looks. In fact, his lack of qualifications and preparedness is absolutely clear on the public record we have so far. It would disqualify a corporal from being promoted to sergeant or a major to colonel, not to mention the promotion he is getting. But what I make of that comment is that this background check has to be expanded. It's inadequate. It has gaps. They failed to interview, for example, former wives who now we know, according to the most recent affidavit, were victims of abusive behavior by him, according to that sworn statement. And the denial of a second round of questioning, the denial of access to the FBI report. There's a cover-up here, and he's benefiting from it.
Senator, I just want to mention to our viewers that the picture we're showing on this side of the screen is still the president and his wife touring the fire damage out in California. In the meantime, some in the GOP have said those allegations that you're talking about don't speak to his readiness for the job. Why do you think differently?
You know, the readiness for serving in the military includes abiding by certain standards. And marital infidelity, adultery, clear and open abuse of alcohol, financial impropriety, they speak to readiness. And they would be disqualifying to someone seeking higher office in the military itself. He's going to be in charge of our national defense. There is no more consequential position in the United States government. He will be second under the president to having charge of war and peace and commanding military men and women whose lives will be put in harm's way as a result of his decisions. So the kind of disqualifying information that's already on the public record, not from anonymous smears, as he would say, but from people who have come forward and put under oath in this latest sworn affidavit the kinds of information that bears on not just his readiness, but his character and his opposition to women in combat, his Islamophobic comments, his apparent contempt for certain members of the military themselves, I think speak also to his lack of qualification.
And Senator, as you know and you pointed out, 2 Republican senators, Murkowski and Collins, voted against Hegseth in that procedural vote you had yesterday. Do you think anyone else will follow suit, or do you see him getting the job?
I'm very clear-eyed, Phil. As much as I am disappointed in my Republican colleagues because the record is so clear here, I also understand the Trump pressure campaign, the threats and intimidation going to possible primaries, discouragement of political contributions, very clearly have had their impact on my Republican colleagues. So I think the likelihood is he'll be approved. But I think that my Republican colleagues may well be haunted by this vote. I hope for America's success that he will be successful. His success will be the success of our military and our national security and defense. But I'm just very fearful about what may happen under his lack of leadership.
All right. Senator Blumenthal, appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you.
And while the president is visiting disaster areas, as we've been showing you, his promised immigration crackdown got underway with troops arriving at the border and immigration raids in major cities nationwide. Here's Chief Global Affairs Correspondent Martha Raddatz.
Tonight, for the first time, U.S. military aircraft flying undocumented migrants out of the country as President Donald Trump launches his deportation campaign. The White House releasing these pictures, dozens of migrants in chains boarding C-17 aircraft. The flights landing in Guatemala carrying roughly 160 people, men and women.
Deportation's going very well.
Today, the Trump administration's new border czar, Tom Homan, telling me it's only the beginning.
Is that going to be a constant commitment from the U.S. military every single day to take deportees out?
Yes.
This as the military buildup on the border escalates. 1,500 active duty personnel, Army and Marines deploying. Their mission to support enhanced detection and monitoring efforts and repair and replace physical barriers. ABC's Matt Rivers on the ground in San Diego.
So right now these Marines are offloading concertina wire. They're going to bring it right down to the border to reinforce it. It's clearly meant to be a deterrent against future migration, and these kinds of supply flights, we might see a lot more of them over the coming months.
Far from the border, ICE raids and arrests in cities across the country in the days since the president was sworn in, some of them likely long planned, but a clear sign of what's to come. Boston, New York, and Newark, New Jersey. Newark's mayor saying agents raided a small business without a warrant, detaining American citizens in the process.
People were fingerprinted. Pictures of their IDs and face were taken there. When I got this information, I was appalled.
The Trump administration releasing numbers showing 538 arrests over the past 24 hours. The White House saying they're initially targeting undocumented immigrants who have committed violent crimes. But Homan acknowledges not everyone swept up in the raids fits that profile. And he has a stark warning to anyone who's in the country illegally.
So is this what we will see every single day, ending in what the president has promised is millions and millions being deported?
Yes, but you can see the numbers steadily increase, the number of arrests nationwide as we open up the aperture. Right now it's concentrating public safety threats, national security threats. That's a smaller population.
So after you do that, then you go after everybody who is there illegally.
If you're in the country illegally, you're on the table, because it's not okay to, violate laws of this country. So if you're in the country illegally, you got a problem. And that's why I'm hoping those who are in the country illegally who have not been ordered removed by the federal judge should leave.
Powerful words, Martha Raddatz. Thank you for that. There's still much more to get to here on Prime tonight. Terrifying moments for a father when his car is stolen with his toddler inside of it. What happened after the suspects took off? But next, some of the world's billionaires were in attendance at the inauguration. Their wealth in stark contrast to what many are facing in America as they struggle to pay their bills. That gap could be a telling sign that we are perhaps in a second Gilded Age. What that could mean for our country's future.
The Gilded Age is very much a time of sort of a tale of two kinds of America. One where things are going great, and at the same time, there's a lot that people are saying we seem to be heading in a really dark direction.
For the record, your name is Xavier Collins.
Yes.
You have 2 children.
Yes.
When was the last time you saw Cal Bradford alive?
Agent Collins, have a seat. I walked the president to his room at 2204.
When did you discover the body?
At 8:01, that's when I found him lying next to his bed.
Did you kill him?
No.
Is a part of you happy that Cal is dead?
Is suffocated. We are all here to help them. We're going to make this happen. We have 96 hours to build a house.
Come on, guys, it's moving day. Let's go. It can't be real.
This was more than just extreme home makeover. This was extreme life makeover.
Extreme Makeover Home Edition, Thursday on ABC and stream on Hulu.
I'm 110% ready to fall in love.
Tall, handsome, smart. He's perfect.
Time just stood still.
It's kind of already sinking in that these other girls are dating my boyfriend.
Everybody just really wants Grant, and we're all fighting for his love.
You act like you don't care.
He knows how I feel.
I know I'm in trouble.
Everyone's so mean.
I did not know how hard this was going to be.
Whenever, wherever news breaks, it's so important to always remember that lives are changed. Here in London, in Buffalo, Uvalde, Texas, Edinburgh, Scotland. Reporting from Rolling Fork, Mississippi. Ukrainian refugees here in Warsaw. We're heading to a small community outside of Mexico City. Getting you behind the stories as they happen. ABC News Live Prime. We'll take you there.
Stream ABC News Live weeknights wherever you stream your news. Only on ABC News Live.
Welcome back. President Trump's inauguration this week, attended by some of the richest men in the world. Their wealth in stark contrast to those who've protested in recent strikes, fighting for a living wage. Some historians say this construct resembles another famous time in our nation's history, the Gilded Age, a time marked by extreme wealth on one end and people struggling to pay their bills on the other. Tonight, we explore how the lessons of the past could help to inform our present and our future. The grandeur.
It's called the Great Hall, and it is a perfect 50 by 50 box.
The opulence.
70 rooms, but that includes servants' quarters.
Of course.
Gold everywhere, vaulted and intricate ceilings, wealth built from a railroad empire.
When railroads came into existence here, it changed the country completely.
An emergence then just as revolutionary as social media, e-commerce, and space exploration is now.
Look at those figures that are up there. And those are life-size. Those are life-size.
A home so big, it has a name. The Breakers, vacation home to the powerful and famous Vanderbilt family. ABC News getting a tour from Leslie Jones and Trudy Coates, historians for the Newport, Rhode Island estate, one of several historic mansions here.
There aren't that many guest rooms. The way that this house is designed and the society was designed, you're in Newport, you should already know everybody else who's here.
This massive summer home now a museum, a relic from the Gilded Age, a time in this country from the late 1870s to the turn of the century, during which a small group of powerful families like the Vanderbilts, Rockefellers, Astors, and Carnegies amassed extreme wealth. And behind the luxury of the Breakers, a staff of 40 servants. All of this for the family to spend just 2 months of the year here.
It's an age of unprecedented wealth creation, of amazing technological innovation, like the advent of electricity, electric lights. We don't think of railroads as high-tech, but they were high-tech in those days.
That changed everything.
Yeah, the population is booming. America's rolling westward. So it's a great age of expansion, growth, optimism, dynamism.
From HBO's series The Gilded Age.
This is the age of achievement, Mr. Russell.
To the 2022 Met Gala red carpet's Gilded Age dress code, the era and its excess still carries influence. Historian Edward O'Donnell says as much as the Gilded Age is defined by its extravagance, it's also defined by feelings of uncertainty, driven by the working class.
It's a time of unprecedented social turmoil. From 1880 to 1900, there are 37,000 strikes. And there's also great turmoil about immigration, about political corruption. If you don't like a particular politician, you can vote them out of office. But how do you vote Vanderbilt or Carnegie or Rockefeller out of their position? You can't. They can shape politics, get tariff policy in their favor, get labor laws stymied. The Gilded Age is very much a time of sort of a tale of two kinds of America, one where things are going great, and at the same time, there's a lot that people saying, we seem to be heading in a really dark direction.
Some historians believe we could be experiencing a second Gilded Age.
We did many things policy and law-wise in the 1980s, 90s that changed the game, that changed our tax structure, changed, almost eradicated regulation of Wall Street, and so that the rules have changed in the favor of the super wealthy.
The golden age of America begins right now.
The nation's wealthiest donating to and attending President Trump's inauguration.
We will pursue our manifest destiny into the stars, launching American astronauts to plant the stars and stripes on the planet Mars.
And some securing positions of political influence.
This is an order creating and implementing the Department of Governmental Efficiency, known as DOGE.
Okay, that's a big one.
Unions battling big corporations.
At some point, you have to say no. We're not going to take this anymore.
Concerns about wealth inequality.
An oligarchy is taking shape in America of extreme wealth, power, and influence that literally threatens our entire democracy, our basic rights and freedoms, and a fair shot for everyone to get ahead.
Do you want to put out some Cheez-Its?
We have probably seen a 30% increase in our grocery bill in the last 2 years. My wages in a full-time capacity should be able to support a basic level of life that I don't feel like we're able to do right now.
Anxiety over immigration.
I will declare a national emergency at our southern border. All all illegal entry will immediately be halted.
And concern over public discourse.
We're going to get rid of fact checkers and replace them with community notes similar to X, starting in the US. The fact checkers have just been too politically biased and have destroyed more trust than they've created.
Looking at wealth distribution here in the U.S., the top 10% of households hold 67.3% of the country's wealth, compared to the 2.4% held by the bottom 50% of households. The combined net worths of just the top 5 richest Americans on the Forbes list, reaching well over $1 trillion. 3 of those men present for Trump's inauguration.
This is a level of inequality that is unsustainable, that's bad for our economy, and that's bad for everyone.
Janelle Jones is Vice President of Policy and Advocacy at the Washington Center for Equitable Growth and was the first Black woman to serve as chief economist at the U.S. Department of Labor. She believes the way to level the playing field is through empowering unions.
Over the past 45 years, CEOs have made over 1,000 times more than a typical worker. For the typical worker, the pay has only increased 24%. Last year, CEOs made more than 300 times the typical worker. In occupations and industries where unions are strong, workers are earning more money, they have more access to benefits. We also see that inequality is less in these occupations and industries. It's less between men and women, and it's less between races.
Depending on who you ask on the political spectrum, labor is a bad word.
Yeah, I mean, labor unions have been demonized for a long, long
50
time.
years.
By the 1980s, certainly a lot of Americans, without knowing why, were just like, yeah, unions are bad.
Right.
You know, I can't say why they're bad, but I just know they're bad or they're not good.
O'Donnell says many of those thoughts were spread by big business in an effort to stop new unions from forming. But now opinions are shifting. However, there are still deep criticisms about unions and their effectiveness, as some negotiations fail to lead to big gains or workplace changes.
Corporate greed has got to go!
And newly formed unions struggle to even get corporations to the bargaining table.
The wages, the hours that we get working for Amazon just simply aren't enough to get by in today's economy.
How did we get out of the Gilded Age and what came after?
The reforms really start coming in the early 20th century, where there's a growing consensus that we need to somehow put up some guardrails, some rules about how Wall Street operates, about how trusts and corporations operate, about how workers are treated. So in the early 20th century, you see the first forms of labor law, which is, establishing shorter hours, eventually the 8-hour day, establishing workers' compensation.
The economy is not some force that rises above us. It's not something that dictates what we can do. The economy is for us. We make the rules, we set the parameters, and we know that we can change those rules if we needed to.
With President Trump just getting back into office, it's yet to be seen how exactly he will work with the world's wealthiest or its most in need. But he is promising a stronger economy.
With oil prices going down, I'll demand that interest rates drop immediately, and likewise, they should be dropping all over the world.
Today, the Breakers stands as a very real representation of not just remarkable design and spectacular wealth, but could also be a cautionary tale for the future. No longer owned by those once powerful families, the Breakers and 10 other properties were all sold or gifted to a preservation society.
They were trying to establish themselves as part of the nobility class in this country.
With the Gilded Age, the influence they were having over the people in this country because of their wealth was remarkable.
Yeah.
And this was just like a big flex. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
To use a contemporary term, a huge flex.
Historians say history doesn't repeat itself, but it can certainly rhyme. There is still much more to get to here tonight. Coming up, the race to save a man who fell through the ice, how he used an app on his phone to help rescuers find him. But next, extreme weather events have devastated communities around the world, and the fallout for children may be greater than we think. We're going to take a look at just how much it's impacting their educations by the numbers.
Are you ready for some football?
All Super Bowl week long, Good Morning America is in New Orleans.
GMA at the Super Bowl. Sounds pretty good.
From exclusive access to the hottest parties, to the best game day food, to football fashion for women, and all the puppies. Plus, Drew Brees, Stephen A. Smith, and of course, Gronk.
It's going to be super.
And get this, you could win tickets to the big game.
Let's do this, people.
Starting Monday, February 3rd.
GMA at the Super Bowl.
For the record, your name is Xavier Collins.
Yes.
You have 2 children.
Yes.
When was the last time you saw Cal Bradford alive?
Agent Collins, have a seat. I walked the president to his room at 2204.
When did you discover the body?
At 8:01, that's when I found him lying next to his bed.
Did you kill him?
No.
Is a part of you happy that Cal is dead?
I only have one rule. Stay out of the basement.
What do you got in the basement?
I can't talk about it quite yet.
There's something down there that will destroy the world.
We're talking about a monster, a real monster. You are in danger. Kids are disappearing.
To find our way home.
I'll get you home. But the crew of murderous bounty hunters is coming after us. We have to move fast.
We have no idea who he is.
You can trust me.
You're a Jedi, right?
Of course.
What just happened?
Watch this.
Skeleton Crew. New episodes Tuesdays, only on Disney+.
Welcome back. President Trump is at a news conference right now with officials in the Los Angeles area after he just surveyed some of that fire damage. He's meeting some of the officials right now. We just showed you live pictures from Pacific Palisades as he and the First Lady, Melania Trump, were touring a street that was just fire ravaged by the unprecedented wildfires that tore through Los Angeles, damaged so many homes and took lives. You can see he's meeting some people there. He's got the Make America Great Again hat on, his wife behind him. And we're told he's going to make some comments at this news conference. He met on the tarmac with Governor Gavin Newsom when he landed. And the president flew directly from North Carolina after he visited damaged areas from Hurricane Helene there. He and Gavin Newsom talked briefly about California needing aid from the federal government. And Melissa Adon's also in Pacific Palisades, where the president is, not exactly at that location. But Melissa, I want to bring you in. Do we know what's happening at this news conference, or is this just the president going to brief the media after what he's seen today?
Right, Phil. So look, this is for what you know where we are here in the Pacific Palisades. Of course, the Palisades fire, that was one of those 2 major fires in Los Angeles County that destroyed thousands of structures. Now, he's only here in the Pacific Palisades, and we're near basically Palisades Village, just down this street. This is where you see essentially down the line, there's lots of media, fire officials, law enforcement, but that's the fire station 69. That is the fire station where President Trump is right now. He's also alongside several of our local leaders and our state leaders from U.S. state representatives. I was just seeing one U.S. state representative, a Republican from San Diego, that's there. We were also noticing other, waiting for images, though, that we were told of L.A. Mayor's Karen Bass. That's also supposed to be here. So essentially, he has just wrapped up and finished the tour across the Pacific Palisades.
Melissa,
that now he's going to now start addressing all of us.
Yeah, Melissa, I don't mean to interrupt, but he just said hello to the mayor, and now he's going to begin to speak.
A lot of them. And every one of them said to me they want to rebuild. I said, will you go elsewhere? No, 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 no. It wasn't even like a question. They love the area. They love the people. It's like a family. It's incredible, actually, when you see some things like that. We just left North Carolina, and we had just a similar type of disaster. It was water instead of fire, but boy, that water did damage like I've never seen before. And then you come here and you see this. But the people are so amazing, and your fire department was so beautiful. Every one of them is in perfect physical shape. I said, what do you guys do? They have very high standards, I can tell you. And we took pictures with all of them, but very nicely. They gave us a little helmet, and I said, you wear this, huh? Is this real? And they said, yeah. I said, it's awfully heavy. You have to be very strong to wear that. But that's the original, right? So it's pretty good. But I just want to thank everybody. We're going to be with you. Your governor met us at the plane, and we had a good talk, very, very positive talk. We have to work together to get this really worked out. I don't think you can realize how rough it is, how devastating it is until you see it. I didn't realize. I mean, I saw a lot of bad things on television, but the extent of it, the size of it, we flew over it in a helicopter. We flew to a few of the areas, and it is devastation. It's incredible. It's really an incineration. Even some of the chimneys came down, okay? When you have the chimneys come down, you know that's pretty hot stuff, and a lot of them were down. That was a bad sign, too. But I just want to commiserate, and we're going to celebrate. We'll be back to celebrate one day soon, I hope soon. The federal government standing behind you, 100%. The First Lady and I are in California to express a great love for the people of California. I've had great support always in California. We did very well recently, as you know, relatively speaking, at least I can say. And it's been amazing. I have property in California, not too far away, actually, right up the road in Palos Verdes, a big property. And I've always loved it. I've always loved being here. But we have to grieve for the 28 Californians who have tragically perished. And sadly, you're going to be finding more. And that's going to be very sad, because I know people are missing. And when you look at that kind of incineration, you know what's going to happen. You're going to find some more. But with all that we've gone through, I watched your firefighters, and they were really fighting at a big disadvantage. I got to know a lot of them just now, and they're incredible people. They were so happy. They were saying, congratulations, sir. You know, they're thinking about country maybe even before this location that they all love. But I'm pleased to be joined by many of the great California leaders, both Democrat and Republican. And it's an honor to meet some of you I didn't know, but I know every one of you by name. LA County Supervisor Catherine Barger. Thank you, Catherine, very much. Mayor Karen Bass. Thank you, Karen. It's nice to meet you. Representatives Jay Obernolte. Where's Jay? Jay, hi, Jay. It's been a tough period, Jay, right? Vince Fong, Kevin Kiley, Vince and Kevin, hi. Hi, Vince. A man I know very well. I know him too well, actually. And I say that actually with love, because he's actually been a great congressman for a long time, and he's a great leader, and he loves the area as much as anybody, right, Daryl? So Daryl Issa, young Kim, congratulations on an excellent career. I appreciate it. Another one I know pretty well is, to put it mildly, is Tom McClintock. And he's been with us for a long time. We have some interesting things going on in Washington. And it's an honor that you guys are here. Thank you, Daryl, very much, Tom. George Whitesides. Good, George. Thanks. It's a great name, too, by the way. Brad Sherman. Oh, I know Brad well. I know Brad, but that's all right. We're on the same side of this one. I know that. We'll work together, Brad, very well. A lot of respect. And Presidential Envoy Rick Grinnell, who's done a fantastic job for me over the years. He was ambassador to Germany, and he was fantastic. So 2.5 weeks ago, over 100-mile-an-hour winds transformed the Palisades fire and other areas, too, into absolute infernos of death and destruction. And this is already the most expensive natural disaster, they say, in American history. That's pretty amazing. The numbers are going to be staggering. Most importantly, we have to get it built, and we have to hopefully find as few people as possible. We have already too many, 28 at least, they say. We're going to work very hard with the mayor, the governor, the supervisor, and everybody, and get the resources behind you. We have some amazing people, and we have some amazing fighters for things like this. I also had the concept of getting some of the best developers in the country. I've had so many calls from developers, and they want to come in. They don't want anything. They just want to come in and help, and they really know how to get things done and get things built. I would ask that the local officials, because we're going to waive essentially waive all federal permits. We're going to have you go very quickly, because a federal permit can take 10 years. We're not going to do that. We don't want to take 10 days. I would. So we're declaring this a national emergency. By doing that, I can give you immediate permits. I'd ask that the local permitting process be the same. Some of the people were saying they're going to be forced to wait 18 months for their permits, and I don't think you're going to do that. I can't imagine that. So they are literally in a position right now they'd like to start tonight, and they'll clean their site, they'll do everything. They just want to start, and they were very concerned with the 18 months. So I'm sure you can get it down to, I would say, not even 18 days. They are ready, Mayor. They are ready to start. I met so many of them. The fire took place. It's nice and cool there now, and they want to start taking the debris. They want to take the debris. They want to do everything. They'll get rid of everything. They're going to do it by their own hand. And you're going to see some amazing things happen. So we're waiving the federal permits. Either waive them or give them to you so rapidly it's going to be essentially the same thing, but we're going to try and just waive them, and we'll rely on the local. But the local, I hope, is going to do the same exact thing. They're literally ready to start right away tonight. So if you could do almost the same thing or the same thing would be great. For a building permit, you're going to have to, check things out a little bit. A lot of them, every single one of them said they're going to rebuild. I didn't have one person say they're selling or they're leaving or they're disgusted. They love their community, and it's incredible. We even had one from your neck of the woods, right? Yeah. Do you want to stand up? It was so nice the way she greeted my wife in a very different language, right? And it was very nice to see. And you're staying, and you're going to rebuild, and everything else. Yeah, everybody. So it's really great. So I'm signing an executive order to open up the pumps and valves in the north. We want to get that water pouring down here as quickly as possible and let hundreds of millions of gallons of water flow down into Southern California. And that'll be a big benefit to you. If you don't want it, you're going to tell me, but I can't imagine it. I tell you who does like it is the fire department. When I said that, they were very happy with that. They didn't mind hearing that. But we have a lot of water that is available, and I hope you can work that out among yourselves. But I think this will show that we have to have that water. We have to have that water. You're talking about unlimited water coming up from the Pacific Northwest, even coming up from parts of Canada, and it pours down naturally. It has for a million years. For a million years, it pours down. You'll never run out. You'll never have shortages, and you won't have things like this. And when you do, you'll have a lot of water to put it out. So I'm going to ask that you figure that out. But I really strongly recommended this 7 years ago, and I think I'm going to just do it. If you have big problems, you're going to let me know, but I just can't even imagine it. But we're also surging federal resources and assistance to the state, and California must adopt the common sense policies to prevent fires. And we all know that. We were talking 7 or 8 years ago. I was talking to people from Austria, people from Finland, people that live in forests. One of the gentlemen, one of the top great leaders of Austria, said, "We don't have forest fires, and we have trees that are actually far more flammable than they have in California, but they literally rake their forest. They take down, if a tree comes down, they take it down. They say you have 18 months. After that, it's like a matchstick. And I know environmentally, some environmental groups like the trees to just melt into the ground, but when they do melt into the ground, they become an inferno. So I think you're going to have to change your ways in terms of that. You have 30 years of leaves, and those leaves are dry as a bone, and they burn. You know, interestingly, because I was at Paradise, who's the general, right? A long time ago, I was at Paradise. What a beautiful paradise it was. And how is it doing, by the way? Are they rebuilding, right? Remember when he said, you were up here, President. I went there. I never saw anything like it. But you know what amazed me? I'll never forget it. The trees were okay because the trees are loaded with water. They sucked that water out of the ground. And this was an inferno, just like, I would say, no different than this. And it was also the wind that caused a lot of problem. I mean, you had tremendous winds that there's not a lot you're going to do with. You had up to 100-mile-an-hour winds. It's unheard of. But when I was in Paradise, I noticed that the trees, they were dark on the bottom, but they were absolutely living, and they lived because they're soaking wet. But the trees that were on the ground, within 12 to 18 months, they say 18 months at a maximum, you have to cut them up, take them away because they're matchsticks. But we saw that. You saw that with me. I commented at the time. I said, look at this. The house is burned down, and the tree is standing, and it's, other than being a little different color on the bottom, and it went through an inferno. It's amazing. It's soaking wet. So I think they have to do it. It's called management of the floor. And when the gentleman from Austria and also Finland and other countries, they said we manage the forest floor very, very carefully, and we don't have forest fires. You know, they just don't have them. So I'm sure you're going to do the same thing. So there can be no golden age without the Golden State. It's a great state. It's a fantastic place, and we're going to have a big celebration soon. We're going to come back, and we'll come back as much as you need, and we're going to turn it around, and we're going to open the coffers. You know, America wants us to be taken care of. This was a horrible thing to watch, and the way it just kept going and going, and then they'd find another area. It was like genius. On the other side, the fire was a genius, the way it kept moving, but we're not going to stand for it. I just met with the Olympic people, and they're all set to do a real job. So we have the Olympics, and I got them. You know, it was very interesting. I made the deal with the Olympics. I was called by your former mayor, and he said, would you call the Olympics? Because I must tell you, the Democrats, as you know, were not calling. They wouldn't do it. I don't know, there was a bad experience somehow. And I did, and I got along great with the Olympic Committee, and we got the Olympics, and then we got you the World Cup. That one I focused on with Gianni. Gianni was great, the head of it, and so you have that coming. And then we have the 250 years coming up, which is going to be a great celebration. But I'll never forget when I got the Olympics, and then I was president when I got them. I said, oh, boy, it's too bad I won't be president. Who knew this was going to happen, right? I said, I won't be president because it would have been the 4 years. And in fact, I'd be retired by 4 days right now, I guess, right? So anyway, so I got him, and at least I'll be able to celebrate the Olympics, the World Cup, and the 250 years is going to be a very big deal. So we have the three biggest there are, and it was an honor to get. If you have any questions, please let me know, and if you have a statement to make, I'd love to have politically, if you'd like to make a statement. Brad, go ahead.
Mr. President?
Okay, I'll do it.
Mr. President, thank you for coming
Thank you, Brad.
to the 32nd Congressional District and
Thank you.
making feel most people don't have adequate insurance because they couldn't get it. So one company dropped 1,600 policies just in the last 6 months. We've got 16 times as much property damage here as from Hawaii. And I'm hoping that we get at least 16 times the federal appropriation for the CDBG program that helps people rebuild. And I know you've talked about policies of California that you're not a fan of, but I've been in Congress for 28 years. I really disagree with Louisiana on their abortion policy. I disagree with them on their campaign finance policy. I disagree with North Dakota on their gun policy. And I would never turn to somebody from Louisiana and say, you keep living on your your cousin's couch, because we're not going to help you rebuild until Louisiana agrees with me on a woman's right to choose. So I'm hoping that we can get these funds and that we don't punish individuals for the policies of their state. You can disagree with them, and I think you've got some ideas. I look forward to us listening. Also on tariffs, I often agree with you on tariffs, but how about no tariffs on building materials for the next 3 years?
Well, we'll take a look at that, actually.
Mr. President.
Take a look. Mayor, please.
Yes. First of all, let me just take the opportunity to officially welcome you to Los Angeles. Really appreciate you coming, and especially you come just a few days after your inauguration. So I want you to know that your presence here is very much appreciated. Let me also say that I know you had an opportunity to see the devastation. You've seen the extreme loss, the grief that people are going through here. And we are 100% committed to getting this neighborhood rebuilt again. You mentioned a couple of things in terms of us expediting. So I signed executive directives right away so that we could cut the red tape, we could get people back building as fast as possible, and we're going to continue doing that.
Yeah, the one thing is they are saying they will not be allowed to start for 18 months.
No, that will not be the case.
Okay, I just hope you're right.
You can hold me to it.
Because 4 groups said that.
No.
That would be, they should be able to do it. They should be able to start tonight.
That will not be the case. You know, first we have to take care to make sure that there's not getting rid of the hazardous waste, cleaning things up so that people can start right away. And just like you said, if somebody their house was destroyed and they're going to rebuild essentially the same, maybe a little bit longer, a little bit higher, they really shouldn't have to go through much of a process. So I want you to know that we are expediting that. We absolutely need your help. We need the federal help.
You've got it, I told you. You will have no permit problem. There will be 0 delay. And as far as I'm concerned, you already have the permits.
And the resources.
I am more worried because I met at least 8 groups of homeowners, and I'm much more worried about the fact that they said it's 18 months exactly. And they were devastated. They want to start now. They want to start removing things. They're not allowed to do it now. And you mentioned hazardous waste. Well, the hazardous waste, what's hazardous waste? I mean, you're going to have to define that. We're going to go through a whole series of questions on determining what's hazardous.
Nope.
I just think you have to allow the people to go on their site and start the process tonight.
And we will.
Okay, good.
You can come back and check.
Mr. President?
Yes.
I'm Congressmember Judy Chu, and I represent the areas of Altadena and Pasadena.
Yes.
That's the Eaton fire, and there is a world of hurt there. I know that you've gone to the Palisades and you've seen the devastation, but it's apocalyptic in Altadena, and thank goodness I have a partner with Supervisor Catherine Barger in working to help people get back to normal and to rebuild. But right now they have nothing, and there have been 9,500 structures burned. Most of the deaths have occurred in our area at the Eaton fire, and thousands of people are without homes. And these are working people. These are working class people. They are people like Dr. Jackie Jacobs, who was an educator all her life and then finally became the first black administrator of her educational institution, Pasadena City College, and then retired, now 88 years old, and then her home of 30 years burned in Altadena.
Yeah.
She has nothing. She left with only the clothes on her back. She has nothing. And so they need this help, and I just want to make sure that you remember the people in Altadena and Pasadena, and that you can come there and see how terrible the devastation has been there so that they can get the help that they need.
Just remember one thing, and I like the way you express yourself beautifully, actually, but I've only been here 3 days, and I'll do a great job. But we had another president, and this took place during the life of another president, not me. But I'm going to be the president that's going to help you fix it, because he would not have been able to help you fix it, okay? So we'll take care of it. We'll take care of it, and we'll work closely. Yeah. We'll work closely, and I know your community was really devastated, incredibly, so we understand that. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, I'm just going to follow up. Supervisor
Yes, please, go ahead.
And I also represent Altadena, and what I tell people is, people of Altadena are the exact people you talked to when you were running. You've got individuals from every walk of life, and it is actually, at one time, was the only place African Americans could purchase homes. It was redlined. And so you've got a lot of generational wealth there. And one of the commitments I've made, and we've had meetings with some of your people in HUD that you've got there now, to work with them and work with your administration to see how we can help. And I've been pleasantly surprised. I know on HUD we've got some asks that we are going to be working with you on. But more importantly, I just really want to emphasize what Congresswoman Chu said, and that is that these are individuals who are feeling forgotten. And what I tell them is, and when we invited you out here, I told, when I went to the AME church, this president was talking to you when he was running. You understand the difficulty in making ends meet. You understand the high cost of living. And now their biggest fear is that that's going to impact their ability to rebuild. And I have made them this commitment, because this is my last term, that for the next 4 years, you talk about 18 months, I've told our county staff that if you're going to get in the way, then get another job. Because we are an all hands on deck. And quite frankly, if the bureaucracy can't get out of the way, we'll just roll over it. And we've said that, and we've made it clear. The governor's waived CEQA, which I feel should be completely reformed, if not eliminated. And if it's being eliminated for this...
How are they doing with CEQA?
How are they doing?
How is it? What's been the attitude of the people running that whole situation?
It adds sometimes years on to an application.
Can't do it. Can't.
No, and the governor's...
And Coastal Commission also.
He waived that.
We're going to have to override the Coastal Commission, because I've dealt with the Coastal Commission for a long time, and they are considered the most difficult in the entire country. And we cannot have them play their games and wait 10 years to give somebody a permit. In fact, I'm going to override the Coastal Commission. I'm not going to let them get away with their antics.
Well,
okay. Thank you. Thank you, David.
Mr. President, I just want to thank you for your leadership on California water policy. You made it a priority from day one. For those of us in the Central Valley in Northern California, we have catastrophic wildfires as well. California is a wildfire-prone area, so ensuring reliable, stable water supplies is critical. And so your leadership, your executive order, moving more water, maximizing flows throughout the state of California, building more water storage, more conveyance, coordinating the...
It would have a great impact on, I know your area very well. It would have an unbelievable impact on your area.
Absolutely. We just want to thank you for making it a priority.
Yeah. You know, even beyond the fire stuff, the farms. I was driving up with congressmen a few years ago because they were complaining they had no water. And I was driving up, and you'll see all of this incredible land, but it's absolutely bone dry. And then you'll see little green patches, and the green patches are so beautiful. You know, they have that land, they say it's as good as Iowa farmland, but it has no water. And it's artificial, has no water. They send the water out into the Pacific Ocean. And when we let that water come through your valleys and down to Los Angeles and everything, you're going to have a different place. It's going to be a whole different place. And you guys have to get together and say, gee, we want it. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen. So at least you said that, and I appreciate it. Because your farmers will be able to, instead of having 1 acre out of 100, which is all they have, they'll be able to have 100 acres out of 100. And it's among the best, they say it's the best farmland just about in the country, as good as any place there is. So, but you can't, it's no good without water. So that's beyond the fire stuff. But today we're talking about fire. But it's good for everything. So I hope you can lead a group. And Daryl, if you can lead a group, I know how you feel. And, you know, support what I'm doing, because what I'm doing, I guess, is controversial. I don't know what's controversial about sending millions and millions of gallons of beautiful fresh water from the Pacific Northwest and further up than even that into an area that's bone dry. We have to, you know, I have a house in Beverly Hills, and you get notices every once in a while. They want you to go down to 38 gallons per person or something, per house, per person. I say, you mean you can only have, 38 gallons sounds like a lot. It's not a lot. And they want to do that every once in a while, and you just think it's ridiculous when you have like just about as much water as anybody in the country, and we shouldn't be in a position where you have tumbleweed that's dry as a bone. That even tumbleweed can be nice and green and rich and loaded up with water, and it's not going to burn. You don't even have to remove it. It's not going to burn, but it's just dry. So I hope you can all get together and say, I'm so happy with the water that's going to be flowing down, because I just don't see anything. They talk about the Delta smelt, which is a fish that's this big, but it is really not, doesn't have to be protected because it's in other areas. It's in numerous other areas. So it doesn't have to be protected. The people of California have to be protected.
Mr. President. Mr. President, could I just speak for a moment?
Kevin Kiley, California.
Yes.
First of all, you're absolutely right about the Coastal Commission. I've introduced legislation to rein them in. We've been talking with Rick about this.
They're out of control.
Absolutely out of control. It's insane the things they've been getting away with.
I think they thrive on it, actually, if you want to know the truth. It's so ridiculous.
That's right. They even tried to stop SpaceX from launching rockets. It's just
true.
But you mentioned your predecessor and how he didn't fix the situation, which is absolutely right. Not only that, during the Calder fire, which was a few years ago, which was in my district, 600 people lost their homes in a town called Grizzly Flat. He came and he promised that he would help them out, but he broke that promise many times. He never delivered them the individual assistance they were asking for. So this has underscored for me the importance of helping the victims, making sure in this situation, in every fire, we get money to the victims, and we make sure that, that nothing stands in the way of that. But I just want to thank you for your focus on bringing sanity to California, water and fire policy. There's no place that needs a revolution in common sense quite like California.
You have so much water. Use it and be happy about it.
Mr. President.
Be happy.
Mr. President, my name is Joel Pollack, and I am a journalist with Breitbart News, but I happen to live in the Pacific Palisades, as do other colleagues. One colleague, John Kahn, wrote the song Fighter, which you played at your campaign rallies. He lost his house and the studio he wrote that song in. We were lucky because I was able to fight the fire on my fence. But when I got to my house, there was no water in the pipes. So I got inside and I picked up the flower vases because I give my wife flowers every week, and there was water there, and we started with that. Then I found my son's bucket of baseballs, and I dumped the baseballs on the ground and I used the bucket. But there was still no water except for the water in the gutter coming from the burnt homes uphill. So I went to and fro to my gutter and my fence with my bucket. Two guys showed up in a truck, two neighbors. We found two more buckets, bucket after bucket after bucket. Many of my neighbors, including some here, tried to fight the fires. They couldn't. We were lucky our house was saved. But we should not have to rely on buckets to put out a fire.
That's right.
You can't stop an 80-mile-per-hour wind or 100-mile-per-hour wind, but there were many things that went wrong here that are basic and small. We did not have traffic police to guide the evacuation, so there was gridlock on Sunset. They've removed the vehicles now, but there were dozens of vehicles that were abandoned by drivers who fled for their lives because there were no traffic cops available. The fire department wasn't pre-deployed, even though there was an extreme wind event coming. And many of my neighbors lost their fire insurance in the days before the blaze. So I asked my neighbors what would they want to know if I could ask the president a question, and the number one thing was insurance. Can you work with the insurance companies to get people back to where they were before they lost the coverage because of California's regulations? And can you make California change its rules so that when we build again, we can get fire insurance and we don't have to worry? And there's one other point I want to make. I really appreciate my congressman advocating for money. We need the money from the federal government. But I also understand Americans who are tired of spending money on California and disasters happen, and the California government passes $50 million to oppose your policies. So they have $50 million for that, but not for moving people into rental homes or helping people relocate or rebuild. I would like to ask you to follow the 9/11 Commission precedent and appoint a special master to watch the money, to make sure that every federal dollar that gets spent here is spent on fire relief and rebuilding and not on everything else.
Good idea. Here's a good one right over here. I don't know if you, do we all like
He's
Rick?
very busy.
He was ambassador to Germany. He was fantastic. Angela Merkel's happiest day ever in her history, and she had a long history, was the day I removed him from there and put him in charge of a very high level of intelligence and intelligent people, but they were not intelligent enough to fool him. But Rick Grinnell has been fantastic, and he lives here, and I don't know if you want to either think about it or recommend some people or get together and recommend some people as a group, which is fine. But Rick would be somebody that I would certainly consider. And Breitbart is fantastic, by the way. Congratulations on that. And I was so impressed with the firefighters I met before. And they said that, you know, I asked them how many of the pumps, how many of the hydrants were working. And it was a, you know, large percentage of them were not working at all. They had no water. And the ones that did have water didn't have a lot of pressure. And one of the things that was missing, many of you have sprinklers over your living room and your bathroom and your kitchen. I mean, if those sprinklers worked with some pressure, you would have had a much different outcome. So we're going to work on that. I think in terms of that, Rick Grinnell would be good, or Rick, you'll head up a group of people that would recommend a few people to me, maybe a commission, set up a commission. I like it because we're talking about a lot of money. The other one is Kelly Loeffler is now the head of small business, and small business is big business. It's actually one of the biggest banks in the world. We call it the Small Business Administration, and she's a cabinet member, full cabinet member. She's fantastic. Her husband is the head of the New York Stock Exchange, so they know something about money and other exchanges, actually. Fantastic people. And she wants to come here almost immediately after she gets approved. She wants to come here and open up small business to the area because they have a lot of money. I always say the small business is actually a very big business when you add it all up. And she's going to come here, and it's a very important thing. I want to thank also the First Lady, because she wanted to come here. She wanted to be here. She has so many friends, and she also wanted to see North Carolina because that was another disaster that was so bad, so different, but so bad. And she just wanted to go there. We said we're going to stop at one, and then we're going to the other. In many respects, it was a depressing day, but in many respects, it was a beautiful day because the spirit is so incredible. North Carolina and here. Very, very similar situation. So different and yet so similar, actually. And so I just thought it was very nice. You wanted to be here, and we appreciate that. Please. Jay.
All right, I want to bring Melissa Dunn in. Melissa, I know you've been listening to what we've been listening to. This is President Trump alongside the First Lady speaking with business people, Congress people in the area of Pacific Palisades. He was touring the area a little bit earlier on, not far from where you are. I want to talk a little bit about what we just heard. He started by speaking about waiving federal permits. He said he's going to waive virtually every federal permit he can to get developers in there. He says he's getting calls from developers left and right who just want to start helping. He talked about the rebuilding process. He talked a little bit about the water issues and got some support from some of the Congress people in that area. Tell me what you heard.
Absolutely, Phil. Look, first and foremost, all eyes are on Los Angeles, right? And the accountability of all of this is what's going to be really closely monitored. That's the sense that I got from this. While there are so many homeowners, even the homeowners that Trump spoke with himself directly, then, of course, with the state representatives and the congressional representatives of this area wanting all to rebuild rapidly, but also making sure they follow the procedure, right? So definitely all eyes and attention are on this, and that's something that I'm really going to see because, you know, Trump bringing up that comment that these homeowners said their first concern was that's going to take 18 months to rebuild, and they're worried about that. And he's vowing to make sure he cuts all the red tape possible to make that happen. But then he had kind of an exchange with Los Angeles's Mayor Karen Bass, because she said, first and foremost, there's a process. Look, Los Angeles County has already presented what they're doing right now. The EPA has been on the ground removing this hazardous waste. You know, you're talking about just dangerous particles and materials that are in thousands of these burned areas. Then after that, now the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is figuring out where they're going to put all that debris. Right, that's a process, and that's not something done by a private homeowner. This is state and federal resources that are being used in order to clear out all of this debris. Then after that, once you can, as the government, vow and say, hey, this is a safe property, then for the private owners to start the rebuilding process. So of course that takes time, and that's a point that he kind of had a back and forth there with Los Angeles Mayor's Karen Bass. And it's another point that I noticed too, right? Who was sitting at the table? While here in California, there was a mix, right? I noticed right away, Darrell Issa from San Diego. He's a Republican U.S. representative. But then you had Judy Chu. She was speaking. She is the congressional representative of Altadena and where the Eaton fire was. So then she was also telling Trump, look, you're visiting here in Pacific Palisades, but know that the help is also needed there, and we're also making sure that we're waiting and wanting to make sure those resources get there. And that to me really stood out, because in Altadena, that's where I've done a lot of my reporting, and I've met with so many families. They've actually created this group that's called Altadena is Not for Sale. They're really trying to ensure that the working class families, families that I've met that they've now are, generational homes, they got their homes from their parents. They're scared they could lose the property and never walk back to anything. So there is a lot of issue there as to how can we assure that these families will be given back their property and be able to rebuild. So that definitely was another key point that I noticed from all of this. Bill?
All right, Melissa Adon from Pacific Palisades, California, out there, and you can see the president is still holding that roundtable after he toured the devastation today, along with the First Lady. In just about a half an hour from now, President Trump's controversial nominee for Defense Secretary, former Fox News host Pete Hegseth, will face a very critical vote, a Senate vote for confirmation. We are following that very closely. He just barely cleared a preliminary vote yesterday after Republican Senators Murkowski and Collins voted no. Jay O'Brien has the latest for us from Capitol Hill.
Tonight, Pete Hegseth, President Trump's controversial pick to run the Pentagon, hoping to be confirmed by the Senate, but by one of the narrowest margins for any defense secretary in modern history.
Pete's a very, very good man. I hope he makes it. I hope he makes it.
Hegseth, a former Fox News host and veteran.
We will reestablish trust in our military.
All Democrats expected to vote against him, and 2 Republicans publicly saying no. Senator Lisa Murkowski saying on top of allegations of excessive drinking and sexual misconduct, which Hegseth has denied, she questions his management skills and is troubled by his admission of multiple infidelities. Murkowski saying, I believe that character is the defining trait required of the Secretary of Defense and must be prioritized without compromise. Also at issue, Hegseth's comments that women shouldn't be allowed to serve in combat, a position he walked back in his confirmation hearing.
Yes, women will have access to ground combat roles, given the standards remain high.
But Senator Susan Collins saying she's not convinced his views have changed.
How tight do you think this vote's going to be?
Oh, it's going to be tight. 51's tight, and that's what it was yesterday. It could even be 50, who knows?
That was Jay O'Brien from Capitol Hill, and Jay is staying there on Capitol Hill. That vote expected around 9 o'clock tonight, and we'll, of course, come back to that and follow it for you. Meantime, on the left side of your screen, I want to take you back now to that news conference in Pacific Palisades. The president and first lady, after touring some of the horrific damage out there, are holding a roundtable with folks who live in the area and Congress people who represent the district. And they are having a chance to tell the president what they think about what they need, and he's talking a lot about the rebuilding process. Let's listen to it.
Right about that. Just last year, a couple months ago in October, they put out a fire. The line fire in my district was over twice as big as the Palisades fire. And they put it out less than a mile from my house in an area where we had done thinning, and they stopped the fire, Mr. President, on a fire break that we had built a couple of years ago.
That's right.
We have an area just on the other side of my community that hasn't been thinned in decades because it's being held up by a lawsuit from an environmental group that says we're going to reduce habitat. Mr. President, we need to, in addition to getting resources and boots on the ground to do this treatment, we need to reform our legal system to prevent these lawsuits from tying up these projects for years and years and years. And not to say that the merit shouldn't be heard, but we need to hear them and we need to move on, resolve them.
Is this a state group? State or federal group?
This is a local group, actually, Mr. President, but they have help from the state.
They use the environment to make themselves feel good, and they're destroying our country. And you've got to, at some point, you've got to put your foot down. I know exactly what you're talking. You have local and state groups, and you have federal groups too. And you got to fight them the right way, because you'll never, even if the mayor gives, you're going to have a local group come in and sue. You're not allowed to go on your property. They're going to talk about asbestos and every other thing. They want to go on their property and they want to clean out their property, and you cannot let anything get in their way. And you'll have this place built up quickly, beautiful. It'll be more beautiful than before. And I would do one other thing. I'd give them a 10%, 15% bonus on their house because they went through hell, and they should be allowed to build a little bit, give them a little bit lot line bonus, give them a bonus on size, maybe a little bonus on height. They went through hell. You know, some of them had houses where they were restricted. They have to have an 8-foot ceiling. You let them have a 10-foot ceiling. Let them build a nice house, a nicer house than they had before. But I would give them a 10 or a 15% bonus on their plans. And I think it would be very well received, because they'll be able to build a little bit nicer house. Do you like that idea, by the way? They deserve it. Because you know what? It's not their fault that this fire took place. This fire took place, could have been stopped. It's not their fault. It's not the homeowner's fault. Yeah. And I think they should be entitled to a bonus on their house. Okay.
Mr. President.
Sir, go ahead. Thank you. Some good news from Paradise. We stood together there 6 years ago, along with the governor.
That was so too.
That 3,400 homes have been rebuilt out of the 18,000 lost. And there's 400 more in the wings. And so FEMA was very helpful. Now my colleague who has Altadena here, probably a very similar situation. Clearing the lots, they're probably going to have to clear about a foot worth of soil underneath those foundations to get the toxicity out. So they'll need a lot of help. Those are working class folks in Altadena.
And we did a good job with you people.
And FEMA was extremely helpful.
Yep.
30,000.
That was the old days when FEMA was good. FEMA's no good anymore.
Yeah.
That was when we ran it. FEMA was very good, but now FEMA's not good.
We got to get them on track. But on the water, thanks so much for your strong efforts on that. Right now, Lake Shasta, which is in my district, is dumping more water than what is coming in. So is Folsom Lake. And those are federal projects that should be building up, because we're latter January here. And you can't count on the rain and the snow coming every year. And so if we don't fill those projects, then my colleague in San Joaquin Valley isn't going to get his water for his farmers. Well, it might be all right up in the north. They aren't going to get it. And then the water needs to go through aqueduct for Southern Cal to refill maybe the Santa Ynez Reservoir that was empty during this.
You know, you don't even need reservoirs. With the water coming down, you don't need the reservoir. You have so much water, you don't need it. You only have reservoirs because you're trying to hold water. But you have natural water coming down along the coast. It's for 1 million years it's been coming. You know that, right?
Yeah.
In addition to that, you have a lot of half pipe. In other words, you have the half pipe that's built, and it hasn't been used. You see, it's bone dry. No water's been in that half pipe for years and years. It was closed up years ago.
Had the reservoir,
it's already there. Yeah.
Had the reservoir above Palisades been full, they wouldn't have run out of water in a few hours. It would have gone for at least a few days with 40 acre feet out of 600,000.
That reservoir's been empty for a long time.
Yep.
It shouldn't have been empty. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah, please.
Mr. President, my name is Tracy Park. I represent the people of the Pacific Palisades on the LA City Council. I wanted to thank you for your loyal support to our military, our police officers, and especially our firefighters.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
My top priority going forward is to get these men and women home as soon as possible and open up the pathway to begin their rebuilding process. It was the Army Corps of Engineers who announced last night that it would be 18 months. I am fully committed to doing my part on the ground with our state agencies and our city and our county partners to speed this up.
Good.
I just ask for your ongoing partnership with FEMA and the EPA and our other federal agencies to make sure that we have a commitment across all layers of government to get these people back home. Thank you, sir.
I do. Thank you very much. It's well said. I do have to say FEMA is a big disappointment. We had it working well. We had great people, but FEMA's not good anymore. What FEMA did in North Carolina, you know, they still haven't even gone to certain areas. They don't know what they're doing. And I say, you don't need FEMA. You need a good state government. And when you have a problem in Los Angeles, or when you have a problem even in the state of California, you have your own, essentially FEMA. You fix it yourself. You don't have somebody coming in from a state where they have no idea, like Florida. They come in from hurricanes. They have people staying in Alaska, and now they see, oh, this is very nice. But by the time they get familiar with it, they don't know anything. The FEMA is a very expensive, in my opinion, mostly failed situation. We had great people. We did some great jobs, but each state should take care of their problem and get money from the federal government. It would be so much better, so much more efficient. So we're looking at that because we have had, and you're going to have problems with FEMA too. You've already had problems with FEMA. FEMA doesn't even show up. It takes weeks before they even show up. And what happens is the state then relies on FEMA, and nobody does anything because FEMA doesn't show up. So it's not a good situation. So we'll make some recommendations on that. But you have to push like hell to get the permits, because I'm just hearing things that I don't like to hear. I think you're not going to get your permits as fast as people are saying. We have to get them. And Mayor, if I can help you at all in that regard, you'll let me know. But you're going to have all your federal permits. That's going to be the easy part, which, by the way, is by far the hardest part. You know who controls your water is Department of Commerce, and I already have that approval. And that's usually a very long process, but that's the hard part was the federal, but we already have that done. So anything I can do, please let me know. Please, go ahead. You lost all your schools. You lost four. You lost your 4 schools. Were they completely burned down, the schools?
Yeah.
Wow. All of them? All of them?
Pretty much all of them, yeah. Palisades Elementary, which a number of our kids all go to, I mean, the place is basically destroyed. So we can't wait 5 years for that.
No, you can't. No.
There's no schools. So that's an area where we would love your help and support. I love the idea of having some, local council that can use those federal dollars, implement them quickly into rebuilding those areas.
Well, I'm going to ask Rick to set, I think right from this table, you might put a couple of the fire guys back there on that I just met, okay? Because they're really good. But get a group and figure out how we can do the processing faster.
Mr. President, if I can just defend FEMA a little bit.
Yeah.
They brought thousands of people in. I don't know how they're doing in other states. They're doing a good job for us here. They've got a huge center that's open from 9 in the morning till 8 at night. But also, when you have a disaster this size, you need to be able to deploy thousands of people, which they've been able to do. Now, California, if we did it on our own, maybe we'd have thousands of people.
You do.
But if Rhode Island has a Palisades disaster, are they then supposed to keep thousands?
How many people do you have in California? 36? How many million? How many million people do you have? You have 40 million people. You're not going to get a few thousand people. The problem with FEMA is they come from all over the country. They end up in arguments with your people from California because they want to do it a totally different way. And
They're getting
I can live either way, but you haven't gotten very much done with FEMA and all you have to do is look at North Carolina. It's one of the great disasters of all time.
And Mr. President, you can't have Rhode Island maintain a staff of thousands and thousands of people waiting to see if they have a disaster.
Do you know who came in and fixed North Carolina or the process? Other states, people from all over the country came. And you have the same thing. You have a lot of people from all over the country. Getting the people is not a problem. Getting the organization's a big problem. FEMA's incompetently run, and it costs about 3 times more than it should cost.
I'm hoping
we
that
can
you
spend
can get
money
a
on
better run.
schools instead of giving money to bureaucracy. It takes you so much longer.
Mr. President,
It takes you so much longer.
FEMA for helping our people.
FEMA has a standard, Brad, and I'm a builder. I was a very good builder. FEMA has a standard that's so slow. They want permit on permit on permit, and then they want permits on top of that. If you use FEMA, you'll be here for a long time. What I'm saying is get the city, get the state to give you immediate 24-hour permits. These people are going to build their own homes. They're going to get them built fast. How many of the people, could I ask you one question? How many of the people, what are people going to do for financing? What are people going to do? How many people can build a home, percentage-wise, like where they don't have to go out and get funds? Some people are just not going to be able to rebuild their home because they have a beautiful home, but they don't have cash, right? So what are people looking to do in that case? You're going to have a big percentage, I would assume, Brad, like that. What are they going to do? Go ahead.
Mr. President, without your help, they're only going to get $43,000 from the federal government, even if they have a half
Well, you know,
$1 million
you did
uninsured
something,
loss.
Brad, where every insurance company in the country left California. That's why you have no insurance, because you made it so impossible. People that think like you made it so impossible. And you know,
Brad, me,
every
Mr.
insurance
President,
company.
I don't know what
I'll
you
tell
know
you this,
about my thinking.
I've never seen a state where almost nobody has insurance. And I said, what happened? And they said like 6 months ago they all left, and 2 years ago they had different quadrants, but they left. And you have very little insurance here. I mean, I've never seen anything like it.
We had a lot of insurance companies pull out, but I have no idea.
And the insurance companies actually have been warning you. Now, I'm not a big fan of insurance companies, okay? They have their big drawbacks too, but the insurance company, I've been reading, I read the papers very well, and they've been warning California for a long time. They've also been saying, we want water. You don't have water. You're supposed to get fire insurance. And the insurance company goes, you don't have any water in your fire hydrants. So it's a tough situation. I'm not a big fan of insurance companies. I get that.
They're pulling out of Florida
Brad,
as
you
well.
lost your insurance company 6 months ago because the state wouldn't give them what they had to have.
Yeah, and Mr. President, I remember the...
Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
I'm Ed Ring from the California Policy Center, and in the matter of prevention of fires, in the matter of the cost of rebuilding, both of which affect insurance rates, I think one, to support something one of the other participants said, a reform you might consider, and it could be an act of Congress, is that the losers in environmentalist lawsuits pays the legal fees. And I think that would be a big step in the right direction.
The losers of a lawsuit should pay all the fees.
Oh, you mean loser pays. I love that. Well, if you did loser pays, you could cut your courts in you could cut them down about 90%. Loser pays. You know what would also benefit? Medical. If you had loser pays for medical, your medical costs would go down by 50%. That's an interesting thing. I bring that up, but the only problem? The strongest lobby in the world, you know what it is? The lawyer lobby. So when you go back to your local congressman, hello, congressman, how about going against the lawyers for a little while? No, loser pay is, very good. In Europe, they use it in certain parts of Europe, and they have very little litigations, right? Yes, please.
Mr. President, I represent the 27th Congressional District, which is on the north side of the North San Fernando Valley through Santa Clarita and Lancaster and Palmdale. I just wanted to tell you a story of heroism. Yesterday, we had another big fire. We had several big fires across, and this fire was moving fast. It was moving 1,000 feet per minute. But what these heroes did, the firefighters and the sheriffs and the law enforcement officials, they mobilized 4,000 people within about 6 hours. They mobilized 20 air attack aircraft and helicopters, and they saved the city of Castaic. And so I just wanted to ask you to join us in recognizing those amazing heroes.
I love that.
I think the thing that we all, and I'm very encouraged by your words, we're all here to help the folks here.
Yep,
right?
That's right.
And your words about building quickly, building well, but building quickly is what I think we are all here to do. And I think if we can take that spirit out of today, it is really important that you and your wife are here. If we can take that spirit, we're going to help these people as quickly as possible, get them back on their feet, and recreate these amazing communities that we have here.
And you'll take the word spirit, such a great word, such an important word. You'll take their guts away. You'll take their spirit away if you don't give them the permits. You're going to take their guts. They're going to say, oh, all of a sudden they'll start looking for houses, and your whole thing is going to blow up on you. These people want to get going. This place can go quickly, but you don't want to take their spirit away, and that will take their spirit away. So you're 100% right. Yes, sir. Thank you.
I love my home. My in-laws love their home. I want to make you aware of something that I know you know a thing or two about, which is interest rates. The banks, when the insurance company gives you the check on the name of the mortgage company and you, they offer you 2% interest on that money. The treasuries are 4%.
Right.
They're expanding their net interest margin on the back of fire victims. Could you please, just like you talked to the CEO of Bank of America.
Oh, you noticed that. Oh, look at this guy. He studies that. No, Bank of America, they're not nice. Sounds very nice. The Bank of America, they're not nice.
The banks to pay us Treasury for the money that the insurance sets aside.
Well, we're doing numbers on banks, yeah. We're doing it. Is that Leonard Boxer next to you? Leonard? Huh? We have Leonard and we have, oh, there's Skip. I have them all here, huh? Look at Skip. I haven't seen you in a long time. You used to be a very good golfer. You still a good golfer? Huh? And he's a good guy, too. Hi, Skip. You got them all, huh? Got Leonard, Skip. Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Mr. President, I just wanted to say Paradise is coming back because of the help that you gave us. And we really want to thank you for that. And that's why we're here also, is because we want to help our
We did a good job with Paradise, didn't we? What a fire that was.
It was a terrible
We
fire.
had many people were found, and only the certain type of German Shepherd could even find it, right? You could not tell. The dog would go right up. There's the body. And the incineration was so horrible. So horrible.
And when we see the same devastation.
So Paradise is going good, right?
It's going good. We're coming back. And
Yeah,
it's because of the help, and we want to help our brothers and sisters here in LA to come back too. And I know that's what you're going to do. And so we really appreciate that. But from Paradise to the Palisades, the problem is fuel. It's the fuel, the vegetation, the dry grasses, the chaparral. There's a tremendous amount of it, and we're not.
You got to remove it. You got to remove it, and you got to remove it, and you got to do the other things that we've said 10 times. I mean, you got to remove it. You just can't have it. I see it even now. I saw the fire. We flew over it, and you got a lot of dry stuff. It's bone dry.
And the environmental.
And you know, I predicted this 7 years ago. I said, do it, get it done. And everybody laughed. They thought it was. I said, forest management. They thought it was such a funny term. Ha ha ha. That's so funny. Now it's not funny anymore, you know? We were right.
It's #1 cause of these fires. #1 cause.
You wouldn't have any fires.
Right. And if we just remove those environmental regulations, NEPA, CEQA at the state level, they get in the way of us doing those projects.
It's all a con job, you know that, right? It's all
Berry
a
Creek,
big con
the
job.
town of Berry Creek in my district, CEQA stopped them from doing a fuel reduction project. They said 18 months. That's where 18 months comes from, because at least 18 months on a CEQA review. That community is no longer here today because of the North Complex fire. We didn't build that project. We need to make sure that never happens again. We have to stop those things from happening so we don't have.
Well, it will happen here
Palisades.
unless you're very strong as a group of people and demand that you have the right to go onto your property and start the process immediately, like tomorrow. How many people did I see on your street where they're standing in front of their lot? The house is there's really not much demolition. It's incinerated, right? So it's not like a lot of stuff. It's not like you have 3 stories worth of concrete. It's all incinerated. And all of the people were standing there and they weren't allowed to even go onto their lot. You got to let them do. If you can do that, you're going to see this thing go like wildfire. And if you don't, you're going to have those lots for years because people are going to leave. They're going to, as much as you love your location and your place, and you're in the real estate business, as much as you love your location and your site, your housing sites, they're going to leave. They're going to leave. They're going to find other things. They're not going to put up with it. They have spirit now, but in a year from now, they won't have spirit if you don't let them go. So just harness it. Well, I think, look, I'm going to give you everything you want. I'm going to give you more than any president would have ever given you. If most presidents wouldn't be here, number one. They certainly wouldn't be here after 3 days. They would not be here, I can tell you that. And we're going to override all of permitting. The only thing you have to do is get your state people, which should be very easy, because that's literally so easy to do. And I know the mayor, and I know she's working very hard, but she's got very powerful emergency, it's called an emergency petition. And you can petition very quickly. And I just hope you can give them, because it's very rare that the federal government would be ahead of the state government, because the federal permits are much tougher. But you essentially already have your permits. You can just go and go wild. Brad, as soon as you can get those permits, whatever you can do, if you can put that genius of yours to work on getting a permit, you'll be doing much better than some of the other things you've said, okay? But we do appreciate you. So, Mayor, could I just leave you with that? It's a big permitting deal. We're going to be back, and I'm going to put Rick in charge of just representing me for a period of time until we figure out exactly who we want to do it, whether we want a commission or an individual. You know, if you have a good individual, if you have a really good individual, and they are rare, but if you have a really good individual, it's always better than a commission, because a commission gets bogged down a little bit, Daryl, right? So it's if you had the right individual. And I know we do. We have a lot of great individuals in this community, but it's an honor to be with you. It was an honor to be with your firemen before and your policemen. We met some great people, and these are people that are leaders, and they're just fantastic. It's a fantastic group of people, and they were very brave. I want to tell you, your fire people are so well thought of. You had big fires, and it was hard to put them out, but boy, were they brave. They were really fighting against a tough thing, and everybody in the country knows it. Everybody in the country knows it. And it was an honor to be with you. So I'll be back, and we'll work very hard, and I hope you guys can start doing your cleanup starting like tomorrow at around 12 o'clock, okay? Thank you all very much. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Brad.
All right, President Trump wrapping up a conversation there, in essence, a news conference, but surrounded by people from the area out there in Los Angeles. You see Mayor Karen Bass shaking hands with the First Lady there on the left side of your screen. President Trump speaking with Congress people and firefighters, people who live in that area. He was hearing from them what they need to move on after the horrific wildfires that tore through that area. I want to bring in Melissa Don, who is in Pacific Palisades, same area where the president is, not far from you right now. They gave him that helmet when he met with firefighters there at a fire station where he actually held this roundtable. Melissa, I found it interesting. The president ended there by saying, "I'm going to give you everything you want." It was very those are his words. It was very clear that he wants to bypass a lot of the red tape that happens in the aftermath of a disaster. He had some really negative words again for FEMA. We can talk about that a little bit later, but I want to start with this idea of a special master. It was brought up by someone there in, around that roundtable saying, hey, listen, a lot of money is going to be coming in to help the victims here of these fires. We don't want it to get bogged down in red tape. So, and the president said, good idea. And he looked over at Rick Grinnell, said, maybe you do it, but he's busy. So he's going to look into that. That would help fast track a lot of the money coming in, would it not?
Absolutely, Phil. So while it will fast track the funds that come in, it's still very important. This was a point that LA Mayor Karen Bass brought up. They need to make sure that they're following basically the phases and the plans, right? You can't just open it up all of a sudden, you know, is what officials are saying to homeowners to come in and privately do things. They're trying to basically do it in unison, right? Trying to clear things out first, going through the EPA, then with the Army Corps of Engineers, then allowing that. But there's pushback from that, right? Because it's going to take so much time. You know, that was the biggest argument that even Trump said that he heard from homeowners, that it's going to take 18 months to rebuild. Some people, if they are able to, they want to rebuild immediately, right? So what does the rebuilding process look like? And what is it going to look like for so many different families? Everyone's on a different situation, a different financial situation. And so making sure that funds come, you also have to make sure these funds are appropriately distributed and that people are held accountable and that it's going for the right thing. So there's always that caveat to it. As quickly and as effectively and fast as possible as some of these things can come in and these programs can be put in place, they need to make sure that they're following it with the right accountability. And of course, Phil, what we've seen with every natural disaster that we've covered is just how long it takes often for rebuilding because of all of the processes, making sure for the fundings, I mean, then to insurance claims. It is cumbersome, absolutely. Another point, though, that, you know, Trump also saying that he has full support here in California and making it a point to say that, look, he's here 3 days after the inauguration. Even Mayor Karen Bass giving him credit for being here and for taking the time to speak to so many residents out here.
Yeah, he had a lot of praise for the firefighters. He got a round of applause for that. A lot of criticism for environmentalists. That's surrounding the water issue. Earlier today, you know, the president was critical of California's response to these fires. Among many things, he blamed the governor's policy. Governor Gavin Newsom not at that roundtable, but he did sign a $2.5 billion relief package for L.A. What kind of help will Newsom need from the federal government to build back these areas?
Exactly. So what the federal government has always provided, what FEMA has always been there for, is to provide that immediate assistance, right? They've been giving out those $770 survivors check to people. But of course, that money has run out. I've talked to people that say, now what, right? They're trying to make sure maybe they live in an area where their place of employment was burned down. They don't have a job. They're trying to manage that. They're in temporary housing, but the housing part so far, even if you're able to rebuild, Phil, where are you currently living with you and your family, and how long that's going to take? So federal funding does go into housing, but that's also something that the governor is going to also supplement with his package and aid in helping people find housing. And again, every situation is so different, because then also you have all of the insurance claims. You know, Trump also bringing it up at one point, saying that he is not comfortable with these insurance companies either, but he was saying maybe a reason that they've been dropping is because of the situations here with the fires and what he was calling, quote, mismanagement. So there's issues there, but those were parts of the question, right? So many people, the majority that brought up questions were insurance claims, saying, will they honor it? And then what happens if they don't? Will they just be left hanging? That uncertainty is nerve-wracking, and I think that's where we're all waiting and watching, and definitely able to keep them accountable, because now the new president has said it himself that he's going to give as much aid and support as possible. So let's see how this is all going to shake out, Phil.
And there was a man sitting on the left side of that round table, Brad Sherman, a congressman, a representative. In part, he represents Santa Monica and Malibu. Malibu hit particularly hard as well by these fires. Argued a little bit with the president when the president took aim at FEMA. Congressman Sherman said, I want to defend them a little bit. They have been good. They have a lot of people here. What will other states do if you push this back to the states? But, you know, the president did say, and we're looking at video of he and the First Lady touring some of the damage before they held that roundtable discussion. The president has even floated the idea of getting rid of FEMA completely. He said it was good and operated well under his first administration, and then it was bad under the last administration. He's floated the idea of getting rid of it. What would it take to do that?
Right. So much here to this point about FEMA. First and foremost, you know, whether or not Trump has the authority, that is something that in his presidential power, he may be only able to sign and create a task force, let's per se. That task force would still need congressional action. So if they were to dismantle FEMA, that needs congressional action, congressional support. So that's first and foremost. Also, very important here for any of the wildfire victims, for also the victims that are still reeling from so much of this hurricane damage and what we see in North Carolina. Aid is still flowing to people, and that is still ongoing. FEMA officials telling me today they're still receiving applications. At this point, Phil, there's more than 100,000 applications that FEMA has received and they're processing just for claims here in Southern California.
All right, Melissa Don from Pacific Palisades tonight. Melissa, thanks for taking us through that news conference and, of course, continuing to report out there and show us the damage. Before we leave you this hour, we do want to take a look at the Senate floor. There will be a vote. We are expecting it sometime. To begin, the debate has begun, but there was a procedural vote yesterday to move Pete Hegseth's confirmation vote forward. They will take that vote tonight. You're looking at the floor right now. We're going to follow this for you throughout the next hour or so. Meantime, that's our show for now. I'm Phil Lipoff. Stay with ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. Thanks so much for streaming with us.
Wherever news breaks, it's so important to always remember that lives are changed. Here in London, in Buffalo, Uvalde, Texas, Edinburgh, Scotland. Reporting from Rolling Fork, Mississippi. Ukrainian refugees here in Warsaw. We're heading to a small community outside of Mexico City. Getting you behind the stories as they happen. ABC News Live Prime. We'll take you there.
Stream ABC News Live weeknights wherever you stream your news. Only on ABC News Live.
I only have one rule. Stay out of the basement.
What do you got in the basement?
I can't talk about it quite yet.
There's something down there that will destroy the world.
We're talking about a monster, a real monster. You are in danger. Kids are disappearing.
The news never stops.
From Tampa, we are here tonight as Hurricane Milton has just made landfall.
The surge just keeps coming up.
Right on the border between Ukraine and Russia. We're in artillery position about 2 miles away from Gaza.
And ABC News Live is right there everywhere.
We're not far from where this rally took place, so just stick with us here.
Traveling with the president to the U.S.-Mexico border.
Here in London today.
Off the coast of Gaza.
Downtown Tel Aviv, rockets or missiles coming in.
From the most devastating disaster in Hawaii. Some areas are still smoldering.
Wherever the story.
From the front lines, the ruins of Rafah.
From the FBI.
Reporting from Capitol Hill.
In western Portugal.
Outside of Mexico City.
In Iceland. Let's go.
Here in France.
The eclipse across America.
Just stunning.
Unbelievable.
Streaming live to you.
Wherever the story is.
Wherever the story is.
We're going to take you there.
You're streaming.
ABC News Live.
ABC News Live.
You're streaming ABC News Live.
ABC News Live. Streaming free everywhere because the news never stops. You're watching America's #1 streaming news. Keep streaming with ABC News Live.
Tonight, in just hours, a final confirmation vote for Pete Hegseth, President Trump's pick to run the Defense Department. At least 2 Republicans saying they plan to vote against the former Fox host, who has faced accusations of sexual assault, alcohol abuse, and misconduct. Will he have enough support? Plus,
I don't think you can realize how rough it is, how devastating it is until you see it.
President Trump touches down in California to tour fire-ravaged areas and meet with those affected after speaking with hurricane victims in North Carolina. Meanwhile, the president is signaling he may eliminate FEMA while threatening to withhold aid to millions in California. And
if you don't like a particular politician, you can vote them out of office. But how do you vote Vanderbilt or Carnegie or Rockefeller out of their position? You can't. Shape politics, get tariff policy in their favor, get labor laws stymied.
Could wealth inequality, an uncertain middle class, and promises of a golden age be signs we are in a second Gilded Age? Good evening. I'm Phil Lipoff in tonight for Linsey Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us. We are following those stories and so much more tonight, including the vote for President Trump's controversial nominee for defense secretary. Taking a live look at the Senate floor right now, the Senate is voting on the former Fox News host Pete Hegseth's confirmation. In a rare move, Hegseth and his family are in the gallery tonight to witness the vote. He just barely cleared a preliminary vote yesterday after Republican Senators Murkowski and Collins voted no. Today, President Trump expressed guarded confidence in Hegseth to North Carolina and California to survey damage right after he did that.
Never knowing those things, but Pete's a very, very good man. I hope he makes it. I hope he makes it.
All of this happening as President Trump is in California tonight, where he toured the fire damage with the First Lady. In a press conference just earlier tonight, President Trump declared the fires a national emergency.
The federal government standing behind you, 100%. The First Lady and I are in California to express a great love for the people of California.
Earlier in the day, President Trump signaled he may make major changes to FEMA or even eliminate it if he can, leading to this tense exchange.
FEMA doesn't even show up. It takes weeks before they even show up. And what happens is the state then relies on FEMA, and nobody does anything because FEMA doesn't show up. So it's not a good situation.
Jay joins us. Jay O'Brien joins us now from the nation's capital for more. Jay, the votes are just starting to be cast. I know you're watching it. Take us through the process.
Yeah, so this vote just opened moments ago, Phil. It's going to be open for a little bit later on into the hour. That's how the Senate goes. It can be a relatively slow process. Right now, Pete Hegseth has 2 Republican no votes, and all Democrats have said that they're going to vote against him as well. That means that Pete Hegseth can only afford to lose 1 more Republican, because Susan Collins of Maine, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, 2 moderate Republicans have said they don't like Pete Hegseth. They have issues with his character, as Murkowski said. Collins said she didn't believe certain comments that Pete Hegseth made about walking back comments he'd previously made about not supporting women in combat, that she didn't believe Pete Hegseth has changed his views on women. They both issued statements in which they really gave this laundry list of issues that they have with Pete Hegseth at the top job in the Pentagon. But nonetheless, they're the only 2 no votes. If there's a 3rd no vote amongst the Republicans, that would mean that J.D. Vance, the vice president, would have to come in and break the tie, as is the vice president's role in the Senate. It would mean Hegseth would still get confirmed. But if there were 4 Republican no votes, that would put Pete Hegseth on track to lose. We know of no other public no votes at this hour other than Collins and Murkowski, but we're keeping a close eye on the Senate floor to see what some of these tight-lipped Republicans would do. Certainly, we have a close eye on Mitch McConnell, the former top Republican in the Senate. He has been characteristically tight-lipped about what he is going to do. He has not made really any kind of public support statement in support of Pete Hegseth. He has not said whether or not he's going to vote yes or no, although he voted yes yesterday on a procedural vote as it relates to Hegseth. So keep an eye on Mitch McConnell. Keep an eye on Tom Tillis of North Carolina, who has said over the course of this process that he's doing his quote-unquote due diligence into Pete Hegseth. But right now, if all things hold and there are no new no votes, it puts Pete Hegseth on track to lead the Pentagon, Phil. And as you said, Pete Hegseth is here on Capitol Hill making this rare appearance, very unusual for a nominee to come here to the Hill to watch his or her confirmation vote. But Pete Hegseth and his family here tonight to do just that, Phil.
And Jay, in your experience, you know, you have Murkowski and Collins coming out saying no yesterday for the preliminary vote. But in your experience, do people stay quiet and then vote no at the actual vote for confirmation? And then I would put this on it, especially in the Trump era, when he has threatened to primary anybody who goes against him.
Well, I think a lot of our experience doesn't necessarily hold up, Phil, in a situation that is this unique, in that it is very rare for a Secretary of Defense nominee to have any kind of this level of opposition. These nominees are typically confirmed with broad bipartisan support. Lloyd Austin was President Biden's pick to run the DOD. James Mattis was Donald Trump's last pick to run the DOD, who went through a confirmation process. They got Democratic votes, not just Republican votes, or in Lloyd Austin's case, got Republican votes, not just Democratic votes. So to have a nominee of this caliber for a job this central come down to such a narrow confirmation vote as Pete Hegseth is doing is incredibly rare. For a vote of this nature, you don't usually have to watch one or two holdout votes, as I was just describing, because they typically sail to confirmation for a role that is this central and, frankly, this bipartisan. So if Pete Hegseth were to get confirmed tonight, even with just 2 Republican no votes, it would mean that he would be confirmed with one of the narrowest margins for a defense secretary in modern American history, Phil.
And we've reported extensively, you have reported extensively on the controversies surrounding Hegseth. If he does get this position, which he seems poised to do, what challenges will he face as the new Secretary of Defense with such a slim margin for confirmation?
Well, certainly he's going to have a Congress keeping a close eye on him based upon his record and his background. He has made it clear to senators that he says he is a changed man, and therefore previous mistakes he may have made, infidelities that he alleges or he admits to having had, drinking, although he doesn't say that he has a drinking problem. Hegseth has said he would not drink if he took the top job in the Pentagon. Hegseth has denied allegations of sexual assault dating back to 2017, pointing to the fact that there were no criminal charges brought, but Democratic senators are keeping a close eye on that, and Republican senators say they walked through those allegations as well. Point being, there's going to be a close eye on his tenure, given all of that personal history that factored in this confirmation, but also he's got to make good on these sweeping promises of President Trump's significant reform at the Pentagon, doing away with certain diversity, equity, and inclusion programs at DOD, as Donald Trump has pledged to do in a number of federal agencies. Point being, for Pete Hegseth, he's got to make good on this sweeping Trump agenda, having not really had any kind of a senior national security role before. And not just that, Pete Hegseth has never had a senior role at a company of this size. The Pentagon is the largest employer in the United States, employing 3 million people, from active duty military to reservists to civilian contractors. Pete Hegseth has never had any kind of a comparable role leading an organization of that size. That's why Democrats and Murkowski and Collins said they didn't believe he was qualified for this role, but if he gets through this confirmation, he's going to have to prove them wrong, Phil.
All right, Jay O'Brien, we know you're keeping an eye on the vote. We'll get back to you when the news warrants. In the meantime, joining me now is Matt Gorman, former senior communications advisor to Senator Tim Scott, and ABC contributor Amanda Renteria, who's a Democratic strategist and CEO of Code for America. Matt, I want to begin with you. This confirmation process for Hegseth has been particularly contentious. Allegations, as Jay was just laying out, of sexual misconduct, excessive drinking, clouding much of this nomination. Do you think this hurts his standing with the Republican Party or in the MAGA movement long term?
Hegseth, no, not at all. Because look, let's face it, at the end of the day, much like another contentious confirmation hearing, which candidly this reminded me a lot of, was Brett Kavanaugh. At the end of the day, once they're confirmed, they're serving on the court, or in this case, obviously the Pentagon, in good standing until they choose not to anymore. I mean, these things can get ugly. These can get contentious and controversial, as we've certainly seen it will. But once they're in the job, they're in the job, barring some sort of other issues. And so that's the big hurdle he has to clear. That's why these things are so contentious, because once he's in, it's very hard to get him out.
And Amanda, though a few Republican senators ended up voting against at least the procedural vote yesterday, and they say they're going to vote against his nomination tonight, what do you make of the fact that Democrats tried, couldn't stop what looks to be his confirmation? It seems to be a numbers game at this point.
Well, we'll see where this ends up, but I think it's important to note that this is unusual in all kinds of different ways. This is not a role that you usually have bipartisan opposition, even on a procedural basis. And so we've never seen anything quite like this before. And I actually do think it affects their ability when they are in office, because you can imagine that this is different than Kavanaugh in that this is the kind of role where you do brief the Congress, where you do talk through what are the different strategies and policies, and you need to have a good, trusting, credible relationship with Congress in order to move forward. And so as we look at this vote, I think it is if he gets through, it will be a different kind of relationship than Congress has ever had with someone in this role, not to mention having him there in the office. And I've been on the floor for many of these kinds of votes. It's quite unusual to have him up in the gallery while this is happening, and it's so close.
And this is for both of you. More confirmation hearings, obviously, starting soon with other nominees like Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr. What are your predictions there? And I know, this is just, you don't have a crystal ball. We're reading the tea leaves here. Matt, I want to begin with you.
Yeah, no, look, I think what we've seen here tonight is that Republicans can vote against nominees. I mean, Collins voting against a Republican nominee is not a surprise. She voted against Betsy DeVos during Trump's first term. She needs to do that for her base in Maine, a blue state. Murkowski is obviously a moderate, voted against Kavanaugh, and a couple other nominees as well throughout the Trump time. Not a surprise. Gabbard, barring any other unforeseen thing, it's going to have a contentious hearing, much like RFK, but likely to get through. Again, caveat, some things we don't know. But right now, as we're seeing tonight, 4 GOP no votes that would kill a nominee is a very high bar. It's not easily clear.
And Amanda, to you, what about those specific two, Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr.?
So there's a couple things that one is true. Math is math, right? So the numbers are and the votes are what they are. And it's true, 4 is a high bar. Tulsi Gabbard's an interesting candidate because she already has relationships in Congress, and they haven't necessarily been positive. So it makes it a little bit unusual of a candidate because people have been uncomfortable with some of the actions, who she's met with when she's gone on trips. So it's a little bit different. We'll see how this plays out. But I will say the vote here will really send a message on how much are Republicans willing to follow where Trump wants to go. Therefore, if Pete gets through, there's likely to be a reality that most are getting through simply because of the math.
Yeah, and is that math made more difficult? And Matt, you mentioned this. It depends on you're talking about the districts that people come from. There's a great deal of pressure from the White House that has a mandate going into this next 4 years from the American people, winning all the swing states and the popular vote. That if you don't back the president and his nominees, that you could face a primary.
Let's face fact, right? Trump is at the zenith of his power right now. He's never been more personally popular. His job approval is above 50%. So if you're going to go against Trump now, I mean, that says a lot, right? And I know this firsthand, right? Collins has to buck some nominees, as we saw when she ran a very underdog race and impressively pulled out in 2020. She did so by being Maine-centered, not necessarily Trump or a Republican senator. I think that is key. And again, even McConnell, and that's a leap, candidly, to say that he's going to vote against some of these nominees. There's been no evidence of that. He voted for cloture last night, as you mentioned, with Hegseth. Who's the fourth? Like that's the issue here. Even if those 3 fall in line, that 4th person, it's hard to find someone to do that. And that's just the facts of it.
All right, Matt, Amanda, thank you both very much. We'll continue to watch this vote tonight. In fact, I want to go right now to Jay O'Brien on Capitol Hill. Jay, you've got some breaking news to report.
Phil, and forgive me for looking down at my phone. I just want to make sure I get this statement right. We just got a statement in the form of a post on X from Senator Thom Tillis. And you heard me mention him earlier on in the broadcast. Thom Tillis was one of those votes that we were watching because, again, Pete Hegseth cannot afford to lose 4 Republican votes. And he's already got 2, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski. They have said they were no. We were watching Mitch McConnell as a possible 3rd. We have not seen whether or not he has voted yes or no yet. And we were watching Thom Tillis as a possible 4th. Thom Tillis, before he walked out onto the Senate floor, just posted on X that he has been, dropping my phone. There we go. That he's been clear, he says, from the beginning that he would give deference to President Trump and his nominees. nominees, meaning if Donald Trump picks someone, that Thom Tillis would give significant weight to the fact that that person was President Trump's choice. He says of Pete Hegseth's nomination, quote, "I conducted my own due diligence, including asking tough questions of Pete, and I appreciate his candor and his openness in answering them." And then he goes on to signal that he is going to support Pete Hegseth. It was Thom Tillis yesterday who told reporters that new allegations leveled by Pete Hegseth's ex-sister-in-law, that Pete Hegseth's ex-wife was afraid for her safety around her then-husband, gave Tillis a reason to say that he was going to dig deeper into those and do quote-unquote due diligence into those additional allegations. Now, Pete Hegseth has denied those allegations. He's denied allegations that he committed sexual assault in 2017. He's denied allegations that he had a drinking problem. He's denied allegations that he mismanaged veterans' charities. What Tillis says is that he went through each of those, conducted due diligence into each of those, and he has said that after looking into all of that and after kind of frankly dragging all of this out and keeping us into suspense as to which way he was leaning, he's going to vote yes on Pete Hegseth. So if there are no other no votes, even if there's a third no vote, even if Mitch McConnell, we've been keeping an eye on, does ultimately cast a no vote, which is not a done deal at this hour, that means Pete Hegseth is on track to being confirmed. Now, if there are 3 no votes, it means that J.D. Vance, the vice president, as is the vice president's role in the Senate, would have to come in and cast that tie-breaking vote, and it would mean Hegseth would only squeak by to confirmation, but still, he would win confirmation. The vote's not final yet. No votes are locked in yet, but it's a good sign for Pete Hegseth.
Yeah, and Thom Tillis, as you said, your words, you sort of dragged it out. He did make folks believe, and if you believe his words, of course, he did his due diligence and he's giving deference to the president. But in the end, it appears he's going to vote the way most Republicans are going to vote. So it really is immaterial sort of what Mitch McConnell does at this point, it would seem. But I'm wondering, Jay, if this is the way this contentious hearing ends, if this is the way it's going to end, what do you think that means for a Tulsi Gabbard and our RFK Jr.?
Well, that's an excellent question, Phil, because they now have their confirmation hearings set for next week. Oh, wait, Phil, just got it. Mitch McConnell is a no. Mitch McConnell just cast a no vote for Pete Hegseth, which means now Pete Hegseth has 3 public no votes. Susan Collins of Maine, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, and now Mitch McConnell, the former top Senate Republican who bent his Senate Republican conference to his will when he was leading that body. Now, no longer in a leadership role, now just a senator of Kentucky, albeit a powerful senator from Kentucky. He is a no vote on Pete Hegseth, which means Hegseth has 3 Republican no votes. And if there's not a 4th, which it looks like there might not be if Thom Tillis isn't a no and we don't get any other surprises, it means they're going to have to bring J.D. Vance into that chamber and cast the tie-breaking vote, Phil. Now, to your question earlier, what it means for some of other Donald Trump's controversial cabinet picks, they have their confirmation hearings set for next week. RFK Jr. does, as does Tulsi Gabbard, as does Kash Patel, Donald Trump's pick to run the FBI. And they are considered this second tranche of nominees. And there are senators looking at them very quizzically, especially Tulsi Gabbard, because there are senators who have privately expressed concern about Tulsi Gabbard's past comments about Russia, in line with Kremlin talking points at times, about her past relationship with Bashar al-Assad of Syria, having met with him even after he gassed his own people. And so watch for those issues to come up in her confirmation hearing and some other thorny issues to come up in Kash Patel's hearing, as well as RFK Jr.'s.
You know, sometimes, Jay, during these votes, a powerful senator, the way he or she votes, it can sort of be permission for someone else to go in that direction. I'm wondering what you think of the timing of getting those statements, the timing of Thom Tillis and then McConnell right after, maybe perhaps having permission to go in the other direction. And are you surprised? Is it a surprise that Mitch McConnell voted the way he voted?
Well, Mitch McConnell had always been tight-lipped all week about his decision, Phil, and I had shouted questions at him repeatedly in the hallway, and as Mitch McConnell so often does, He just smirked, he raised his eyebrow, and he walked on by. You know, he knew more than what he was prepared to tell us. And you'll have to forgive me for consistently looking down at my phone. That's how I get updates from the floor, because the floor is all the way over there. So give me 1 second as I look down. But essentially, Phil, to your point, although we are at the Capitol, by the way, we're in the Cannon House office building, if you care. But my point is that for Mitch McConnell, it was always somewhat expected in the Republican conference in the Senate that he was going to cast this vote this way. He had never said it publicly, but we were keeping a close eye on him because of A, how tight-lipped he'd been, and B, that his worldview doesn't typically align with Pete Hegseth. Mitch McConnell is someone who is a defense hawk. He now sits on a key defense appropriations subcommittee, which, by the way, is going to be integral in working with Pete Hegseth's Pentagon if Pete Hegseth were to be confirmed. And he's someone who has typically supported those with requisite national security experience, and Pete Hegseth has never served in any kind of a senior national security role. And even President Trump earlier on today seemed to indicate that he thought Mitch McConnell would probably break ranks with his fellow Republicans and vote against Pete Hegseth. But nonetheless, it does carry weight. It does carry power to have the former leader of the Senate Republicans vote against a pick of Donald Trump's for such a key role. But another thing you got to keep in mind here, Phil, is that Mitch McConnell is no longer the leader of Senate Republicans. John Thune is. And as I was discussing with some of my colleagues earlier, including our Miriam Khan, who covers the Capitol, and our Ali Pecorin, our Senate producer, who also covers the Capitol with us, it's unclear if John Thune would have brought this action to the floor if he didn't think he had the votes to get it over the goal line, even if those votes ultimately came with a tie-breaking vote from J.D. Vance.
Yeah, the math here is always important to bring the vote to the floor. Jay, first of all, you don't ever have to apologize to having one eye on your phone and one eye on the camera, because that's how you report. We've seen you chase people down the hallways and do 6 different things at the same time. So keep looking at your phone, keeping us up to date. I do want to ask you this. You talked about Tom Tillis, and we know which way he is voting. You talked about Mitch McConnell. You know which way he's voting. I didn't hear any other names. Would anybody else coming forward and voting no surprise you?
Not really. Well, it would be incredibly surprising, excuse me. When I say not really, I mean to say we're not tracking anyone who is a possible no vote, so it would be incredibly surprising to see someone that was not those names that we just listed. And it's interesting because when you reference the no votes, one of the things we had seen just yesterday is we got our first public no votes yesterday. It was only yesterday that we learned for sure that Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski were going to be no votes, because there was a key procedural vote on Pete Hegseth yesterday. It wasn't the official vote. The official vote's happening now, but it was a key procedural vote. And so we were watching that closely as a bellwether to see what the no votes would be. Mitch McConnell was a yes on that key procedural no vote, but a no vote on the official vote tonight. And the sense we get is that's just because Mitch McConnell didn't want to be obstinate in a way that he didn't need to be. But Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski clearly from yesterday into today staking a claim as to saying that they don't believe Pete Hegseth is qualified or should serve in this role or can serve in this role. Both of them issued lengthy statements, Phil, where they walked through their various issues with Pete Hegseth. Murkowski talked about those allegations of sexual assault and excessive drinking, et cetera, which Pete Hegseth denies, said that they gave her pause. She said that she doesn't think that he has the necessary experience to run the Pentagon. She referenced his comments about women in the military, comments he had made in other venues like podcasts saying that he doesn't believe women should serve in combat, comments that he walked back during his confirmation hearing, in part due to questioning from Joni Ernst, a sexual assault survivor and a combat veteran, now the senator from Iowa, who after that hearing came out and said that she liked Pete Hegseth's answers and she was going to support him. She was seen as kind of a key bellwether vote as well. And Susan Collins said that she just didn't believe Pete Hegseth's answer there when he walked that back and said that women would still serve in combat roles in his Pentagon if, quote unquote, the standards remained high, as Pete Hegseth said. So they had serious issues with them. They walked through them in length, clearly a message to us in the news media to try to answer some of our questions as to how they would vote, but also a message to their colleagues as to say, at the 11th hour, these are our issues with him. Would you potentially get on board with us?
So many things come into consideration for a member to vote, and Mitch McConnell has not been afraid to be at odds with the president in the past, and quite frankly, he's not looking at a 30-year career ahead of him like some of these other senators are who would not want to get primaried. Jay, just before we let you go and take an actual look at this vote, take us through what would happen now with the vice president.
So if there are 3 no votes, and they're not locked in yet because this vote isn't over, when the vote is officially over is when we get the official count. The Senate takes a long time to vote. But if that were to happen and we had 3 no votes and it were a tie, then J.D. Vance would have to come stand there in the well of the Senate, or rather at the podium there in the Senate, at the rostrum, and give an aye vote and put it over the goal line. We saw Kamala Harris do that time after time after time when she was vice president on contentious pieces of legislation that were going to come down to the wire. Now we will see J.D. Vance do it for the first time as vice president on a controversial nominee, Phil.
All right, those kind of margins, that's what we get. Jay O'Brien, thank you very much. We'll get back to you in just a minute. I want to bring back in Matt and Amanda now. Matt, Amanda, we have a little bit more information now with Tom Tillis and Mitch McConnell. I want your thoughts on Mitch McConnell. Amanda, I'll start with you.
You know, listen, this is the former Senate Majority Leader, and he still has quite a bit of relationships within the body. It matters that he's a no on this. It is telling that he is a no on this. It's also telling that he waited, right? He clearly didn't want to influence other people's votes, but now when it comes down to the wire, you are required to put a yes or no by your name. And I think it is interesting, especially for such an important role in the United States. This is a big deal to be watching right now.
And Matt, I want your thoughts on the way Mitch McConnell had voted. And to Amanda's point, why would he not want to influence?
I think it's very interesting, candidly surprising that he voted against. I was very surprised when Jay mentioned that. I also thought the timing was notable, right? I think in some respects he didn't want to be the deciding vote, the one that would make a Hegseth nomination go down, per se. Because, again, he is still the leader, or I should say he still has a pulse of his caucus. So he let the person, Tom Tillis, in a competitive race out in North Carolina, get in front of him, assure the confirmation was, going to happen, and then drift in the wake of this. I thought that was notable, the timing, too. This is like a man who still understands very acutely the politics of the Senate, and the timing of it I took note of, and I think we saw that clearly.
Yeah, that was my first thought, too. I mean, he's a keen political operator and, as you say, has the pulse on the caucus. And it was literally, 30 seconds to a minute, I think, after Tom Tillis released that on X. That's how quickly Jay gave us that statement. I'm wondering, and Jay and I talked a little bit about this, but Amanda, I'm wondering if you think there's anybody left, on the floor of the Senate who could cast a no vote tonight.
It's hard to see, but again, people have this is one of the first major votes and big tests for the Republican Party and leaders. And so if you were a no vote, what I have seen in the Senate, particularly at this moment, is you hold tight. And, it is true. No one wants to be their last vote. But again, this is a major, major role in the United States government that will decide the direction of our defense, of our military at such a critical time. And so if anyone is out there trying to figure out what to do, I understand that it could go up to the very wire because of how important this is right now, this moment for our country right now.
And Matt, I'm wondering if you think there's anybody left there who I'm not going to use the word courageous, but it would be a risky political move at this point with the amount of power that the president has, the White House, the Senate, the Congress. Do you think there's anybody left there who could possibly vote no tonight?
No, it's done. I mean, Hegseth will be confirmed, obviously now with JD as a tie-breaking vote. One thing to watch for, right? We talked about Tulsi, we talked about RFK. Use a lesson from Matt Gaetz. If we get to the point where individual senators, Murkowski, Collins, and now McConnell, are doing floor statements and, public press releases opposing nominees, that should tell you that even they know they're the outliers in here. It's when, candidly, we had this earlier with Hegseth where there was a little bit of question when clusters of senators behind the scenes start bringing concerns to the Trump administration before things get to the floor. That belies that there's actually more people that are behind, that could possibly be opposed. That's when you know a nomination could possibly be in trouble. If you get to the stage where Susan Collins is doing floor speeches, cake is very close to baked. That's one little rule of thumb for the future.
I asked you both specifically about Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr. You did mention, Jay mentioned Kash Patel. I want to ask you both about Kash Patel because each of these nominees come with baggage, as virtually every nominee does. But specifically, I'm wondering if you think Kash Patel will receive even more pushback than Hegseth found. Amanda, I'll start with you.
I think it's going to be really interesting if this nomination goes through, whether it becomes either, I suspect people are going to feel, particularly when you think about McConnell, when you think about people who are on that edge, whether they can do it again. At some point when you are being asked, and I remember this right when Obama came in, when there are votes and you're wondering about them or you're on the edge, you only have so much of a bank account for that. And so it is going to be interesting to see what happens with these next nominees. But I also want to say those meetings with senators directly, what they say and what kind of relationship they build really matters. And so we'll see how those happen. And you start to get a sense of it when senators come out of the meetings, whether they say, oh, that was really great, I didn't know this about this candidate. And so it's going to be on how well can each of these candidates come in who aren't known, like Kash Patel, who aren't known, what kind of relationship and trust do they build with folks who are going to put their name, their vote on the line for this particular candidate.
I want to bring Jay O'Brien back in. Jay, you're watching the vote. Where are we at right now?
Yeah, so Phil, it is tied 50-50, which means if nobody changes their vote, which they can under the Senate procedure, but it's highly unlikely, it means that right now we're watching our screen, as you see it there on yours, to see when J.D. Vance will walk out to the floor and cast this tie-breaking vote. Again, as you have been discussing with everybody, 3 Republican no votes, Collins, Murkowski, and now Mitch McConnell, who kept his thoughts tight-lipped before he walked out onto the floor and cast that not so surprise no vote and tied it up. So it's 50-50. Again, J.D. Vance has got to break this tie. And it puts Pete Hegseth on track to being confirmed, but it would be with a slim margin. As you and I have discussed, but it's worth reminding our viewers now because we are at that tie-breaking point in the evening. Secretaries of Defense are typically confirmed with broad bipartisan margin. We're talking 90-plus votes, not 51-50. We're talking 98-2 and stuff like that. I was looking at previous secretaries of defense today, and they were all confirmed, save for one during the Obama administration in recent political history with broad bipartisan support. And so this is a rarity. It puts Pete Hegseth on track to be one of just a handful of secretaries of defense since about the mid-1970s who have gone into the Pentagon running that department with such a slim margin of victory in the Senate, Phil.
And just for our viewers who are not sort of locked into this kind of procedure, let's talk about the locked in. When do these votes get locked in? Take us through the actual, is that all we're waiting for, J.D. Vance to come out and vote and then it's locked in?
Yes, that's correct, Phil. We are waiting for J.D. Vance to come in, and then the vote would be finalized after he were to cast that tie-breaking vote. There's a couple things to keep in mind. We weren't certain that J.D. Vance was in the building when I stepped out in front of this camera about a half hour ago. Let me just ask off camera. Is he in the building, Miriam Khan? My producer, Miriam Khan, standing off camera. We don't know if J.D. Vance is in the building. We saw a large security presence earlier on in the evening, and myself and other reporters gathered at one of the doors to the Senate right behind me here to see who was coming in, and it was Pete Hegseth instead of J.D. Vance. And I shouted to Pete Hegseth, how do you feel about tonight? Do you think you have the votes, et cetera, et cetera? All he did was put a thumbs up. Worth pointing out, Phil, that's incredibly rare for a cabinet pick to come to the Senate and watch their confirmation votes roll in. That does not typically happen. Incredibly rare, part of a string of rare things that have happened during this administration over the last week or so. But to your question about J.D. Vance, we were not aware even a half hour ago and up until tonight if he was in the building and prepared to cast the tie-breaking vote or if he was just in the area. We knew he was in Washington. We knew he was being held held back in Washington because of the possibility that he would need to be rushed here to the Capitol to cast this tie-breaking vote. But we're a little bit playing right now, where in the world is the vice president to come finish this vote?
Well, I'll tell you where he is on social media, Jay. He's on X, and just a minute ago he posted, I thought I was done voting in the Senate, with a crying face emoji. So he knows what he has to do, whether or not he's in that building or not. But yeah, he posted that. So much of how we hear from politicians these days, as you saw the Tom Tillis, his explanation come in on X. This too, J.D. Vance, just a minute or so ago, posting on X, I thought I was done voting in the Senate, with a laughing face, laughing so hard he's crying face. And he will no doubt be on the way to Senate, whether he's there or not. I guess we're going to have to wait. And so just procedurally, Jay, this doesn't end until the vice president, wherever he is, gets to the Senate floor and makes that vote.
And Phil, just as a point of levity, because why can't we have fun, right? We're just waiting on J.D. Vance. As you read that tweet live on the air, our producer, Mariam Khan, who's kneeling right off camera on a marble floor next to me, read it to me word for word as you were reading it. It was one of the strangest experiences of my evening. But yes, that tweet is real. J.D. Vance now prepared to come cast that vote. And we're in this holding pattern now of when he's going to walk out onto the floor and make this official. Frankly, Phil, it's hard to believe that he wasn't already either in the building or close by. It's very much unclear at this hour if the White House or if Senate leadership knew how Mitch McConnell was going to vote, and he was going to be that final third no vote if all the votes hold once it gets finalized, and actually turn this into a tie. We know, for instance, Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski had said that when they did their first no vote yesterday on what was the procedural vote on Pete Hegseth that came before tonight's vote, they alerted Senate leadership and John Thune, now the top Republican in the Senate, to the fact that they were going to come out and they were going to cast a no vote so that Senate leadership wasn't surprised. That's a very typical Senate thing to do. It's a place that's run on everybody getting along, essentially. It's unclear if Mitch McConnell, though, tipped anyone off in leadership or at the White House, and he's had an acrimonious relationship over the years with Donald Trump, but if he tipped anyone off in Senate leadership or at the White House to his vote. J.D. Vance is in the building, is that right? All right, I'm told J.D. Vance is in the building. Is he on the floor? J.D. Vance has just walked by the doors right off the Senate floor, Phil, I'm told. And so he's imminent to be stepping out onto the floor in your camera feed there.
Yeah, and we're watching the floor, so we'll see him do that. Jay, staying in your moment of levity, if that was part of one of the strangest things that happened to you on Capitol Hill tonight, that says something, because you live in a strange world there often. I want to ask you about the vice president. This is a big moment for the vice president. They just took office. This is his first deciding vote, split decision vote, and it's a big one.
Yeah, and the question, Phil, is it the first of more to come? Because Republicans still have a decent-sized control over the Senate. They certainly have a better Senate majority than Democrats did in the previous Congress. But still, it's a slim majority. And as we see tonight, 3 votes can turn it all into upheaval. It's nothing like the House, where Mike Johnson is playing with an even slimmer majority. Once everybody who's been nominated to the Trump cabinet resigns, Mike Johnson is going to be playing with a 2-seat majority, a 217 to a 215 majority, until some of those seats can be filled with special elections. So that will be challenging for him. But certainly John Thune has his work cut out for him as well in wrangling this Senate Republican conference. And so the question facing J.D. Vance is this going to be his first tie-breaking vote of this second Trump administration?
Yeah, and we know you talk about the Congress. The Congress is a much different animal. There you have so many things. We watch the Republican caucus have trouble even nominating or picking a leader there. So yeah, we're watching that slim majority as well. We're still watching the floor. I have not seen the vice president. He will no doubt go to that table to cast his vote. Do I still have Amanda and Matt? I do? Okay. Amanda, Matt, I would just like to bring you guys back in. You see what's happening. You're watching it. You hear Jay's reporting. This will most likely end in a 51-50 split. Jay's talking about how just remarkable it is that someone in this position looks like it will be confirmed with such a close vote. Just, Matt, start and give us some perspective on that.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I think it's a symptom of the fact that you have obviously polarized, but you have a president who feels very confident and empowered, and he picks someone who I think is plainly more controversial than a lot of other nominees were. I mean, this is someone he trusts. He's someone he feels is qualified, but it is more controversial, clearly. And so, but he obviously feels and felt empowered to do it. And I think through the power of his own party, was able to get this through on obviously the slimmest of margins.
And Amanda, Matt Gaetz was one of the first out of the gate, so to speak, and that didn't work out. And a lot of people in Washington thought perhaps that might be something that happens again. We haven't seen that. Pam Bondi was very popular. And now Pete Hegseth was the next up, who was, say, even in the area of the same controversial kind of nominee, and it looks like that will be a 51-50 split tonight, the minute the vice president walks out there onto the floor. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think everyone recognizes, as we were talking about before, math. When you have a 4-vote margin and you have the vice president's vote coming in, I suspect we are going to see this a lot more because Republicans as well are trying to figure it out. I do think it's unusual for a former Senate Majority Leader to vote no, and for the White House to not have been ready for that. So it's clear that there's some work to be done on the Republican side to figure out how do they continue to get the votes, how do they build the communication a lot tighter. But there's some angst because this is so unusual. And I think that's the part that I think we're all going to get used to saying is how rare this administration is, and the kinds of ways and procedures and who they put up and how they lead. And it'll be a test for this body going forward in what to do with the unusual.
And Matt, you're former senior communications advisor to Senator Tim Scott. I know you're not out there voting tonight, but I'm wondering, what do you think about Pete Hegseth's qualifications?
I mean, obviously, it was different than most of the kind of people we've had in the past. I think it's a good thing, candidly, whether it was Mattis or Lloyd Austin. I was nervous that we'd gotten to the point where we're just taking leaders right from service, giving them waivers like each of them had gotten, and then putting them right back in. I think we have a civilian-led military. We need to reinforce that no matter what. I think number two, this is certainly someone, you heard this consistently through the confirmation hearings, clearly he felt his differentiation was he actually had served. He actually had been on the ground, on the front lines, and that was something that differentiated him from a lot of people who had done this job previously or people that he beat out for this nomination. I think clearly going into this office now in the Pentagon, he's going to bring that with him.
And Amanda, give us some historical perspective. I mean, I hear what Matt is saying, and every candidate for one of these positions is going to come with some baggage. But setting aside some of the controversies that we saw surrounding Hegseth, what does it say that someone with his qualifications, whether you believe he's qualified or not, is most likely going to step into this position in this administration?
Well, we do know that he's never had the experience of running something like this, the Pentagon. I appreciate the service, but this is actually an organization of this kind of size with geopolitics really in a very precarious place. And we're bringing in, or this administration is bringing someone in without the kind of experience, who has been at those kinds of tables before, with the weight of where our country is going to be in a very tumultuous time. I'm nervous. He will have his shot. And like you'll hear from most senators after this vote, everybody needs this person to be successful. But this is a big job for someone who really hasn't had the experience and qualifications that we have seen in the past. And in addition, doesn't have the kind of support going into this role as we're seeing right now with J.D. Vance having to break this tie.
Yeah, you're right. We've already heard that from Senator Blumenthal tonight. We interviewed him earlier on in the evening, and he said, I'm totally not voting for him. However, if he gets in, I want him to be successful. And of course, I mean, every American would. We need that person to be successful, whoever it may be. Matt, I want to ask you this. If there were senators who were, and it was so far 3 that have voted no against Hegseth, do you think this makes it less likely for people who have a hesitation or even outright concern about a Tulsi Gabbard or an RFK Jr. or a Kash Patel to come forward and vote their conscience?
I think 2 things. I think actually I agree with what Amanda said. If you're Susan Collins, if you're Lisa Murkowski, you can't vote against every Trump nominee that's controversial. Again, Collins is in 2 years, or I guess a little less than 2 years now. In order to protect her right flank, she can't vote against Patel, Tulsi Gabbard, and RFK all at once. You only get so many of these. So she is going to be strategic. Maybe this is the only one she votes against. Maybe there's one other one, max. But again, what I would look for more than anything else is, do you start seeing rumblings about Tulsi, RFK, or Kash before they get voted out of committee? That is the key here. That would tell me that it's not just 1 or 2 Republican senators, but a few more, a block even, that would be opposed. And we haven't heard that as of yet.
I want to bring Jay back in from Capitol Hill. Jay, I'm still watching the floor. I know you are too. Have your producers told you where the vice president is? We still don't know yet.
J.D. Vance ain't there, Phil. Where is J.D. Vance? No one has any idea.
I never thought I'd hear you use the word ain't, but you did, nonetheless.
It's getting cold out here, Phil. It's getting cold out here.
You want the vote to be over. I understand. We all do. Jay, talk me through where we go from here with the next nominees.
Yeah, so the Senate is going to work this weekend, which is rare for the United States Senate, because Republicans have said they want to move these Trump nominees as fast as the Senate procedure will allow them, because frankly, they're under pressure from the White House to do so. Democrats were going to try to strike a deal with Republicans today to actually move this vote up, so it wasn't going to be a 9 p.m. vote on Pete Hegseth, but instead they would move it into the early evening. And the flip side of that deal was that everybody gets to go home this weekend, and the Senate doesn't have to stay and vote on Donald Trump's other nominees over the course of this weekend. And a weekend is a very motivating factor for the Senate, so we weren't sure if Republicans were going to take that deal. And ultimately, Phil, they did not. It's why we're on the air this late in the day. Senate Republicans instead said, no, we are going to stay here, we are going to work this weekend, and we are going to continue to procedurally go through Donald Trump's nominees. That means Kristi Noem is next up. She's going to have a procedural vote tonight, and then she's on track for her official confirmation vote on Sunday morning around 5 a.m. Sunday morning. I know. 5 a.m. Sunday morning. And then, of course, the Senate is going to kick off a busy week next week of confirmation hearings, where we have RFK Jr. up on the Hill, Donald Trump's pick to run the Department of Health and Human Services, who wants to overhaul that agency. Tulsi Gabbard, Donald Trump's pick to run to be the Director of National Intelligence, who's going to be at the nexus of the American intelligence community. And Kash Patel, Donald Trump's pick to run the FBI, who wants to overhaul that agency and has openly mused over the years about using the federal government to go after Donald Trump's political opponents. Those are 3 of Donald Trump's most controversial cabinet picks, and they will have their hearings this week, all while the Senate tries to move on the floor this first tranche of nominees and get votes on Noem, get votes on Scott Bessent, who's Donald Trump's pick to run the Treasury, and other nominees to try to fill up this Trump cabinet, Phil.
Yeah, and overhauling seems to be an overarching theme of this administration and what some of these nominees want to do. Jay, I'm curious. Kamala Harris, who was vice president in the last administration, had voted a number of times, a record-breaking, tie-breaking votes. I'm wondering if you think this is the first of many. That was the question you posed, but I'm wondering if you think this is the first of many for J.D. Vance.
I mean, it's very, very, very possible, Phil, because I think the thing is...
they're clapping, Jay. It looks like...
Yeah, let's see. What's going on the floor, Phil? You have a closer view of it than I do.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We'll take it full. I just saw a bunch of people clap, a bunch of the senators clap, so I figured J.D. Vance was on his way in.
Hey,
he did
so
just
Phil,
sit down. Yeah, he sat down. He's there.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, there he is. Yep. So we should see him make his vote. There they get on him. You see him, Jay.
Change your vote. If not, on this vote, the yeas are 50 and the nays are 50. The Senate being equally divided, the Vice President votes in the affirmative, and the nomination is confirmed.
All right, so there you have it. J.D. Vance coming in, making the tie-breaking vote. It wasn't the robust clapping that you can hear from a lot of times from one side or the other, but this was split right down the middle, and they're looking up toward the gallery. It looks like clapping for Hegseth, who rather unusually chose to be there with his family, but now gets to celebrate as that. Let's listen into Senator Thune.
And lay it upon the table, and the president be immediately notified of the Senate's action. Further, that the mandatory quorum call with respect to the Noem nomination be waived.
Is there objection? Without objection. The clerk will report the motion to invoke cloture.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the nomination of Kristi Noem of South Dakota to be Secretary of Homeland Security. Signed by 17 senators.
By unanimous consent, the mandatory quorum call has been waived. The question is it the sense of the Senate that debate on the nomination of Kristi Noem of South Dakota to be Secretary of Homeland Security shall be brought to a close? The yeas and nays are mandatory under the rule. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Also Brooks.
All right, so Jay, I want to bring you back in. We got more than just the passing of Pete Hegseth's confirmation there. They talked, as you said, about Kristi Noem. I think you said that vote's going to happen at like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning on Sunday, but there's going to be no debate on whether or not they're going to have the vote, right?
You set them up, knock them down, Phil. We're just trying to get these done fast in the Senate. So now they're teeing up a procedural vote on Kristi Noem, which, if/when it passes, because it will pass, will then begin what's called the procedural clock in the Senate. I won't bore you with it, but essentially it puts us on track for Kristi Noem's official vote to be sometime early Sunday morning, again, 4 or 5 a.m. So once this vote passes, it starts that clock, and then the Senate has to come back Sunday morning and officially vote to confirm Noem. And they're doing all of this because they're trying to move very quickly to install Donald Trump's cabinet, particularly because they're under pressure from Republicans in their own ranks, particularly further right Republicans, to do this fast. Some have issued statements saying that they don't believe this process is happening fast enough. And frankly, they're under pressure from the White House too, Phil. And one more thing, we just got a statement from Mitch McConnell, who walks us through why he cast that 11th hour no vote against Pete Hegseth. I just want to give you a snapshot of a little bit of what McConnell said, because it is at times a scathing statement. He says, effective management of nearly 3 million military and civilian personnel, an annual budget of nearly $1 trillion, and alliances and partnerships around the world is a daily test with staggering consequences for the security of the American people and our global interests. He's talking about what the Secretary of Defense has to do. Quote, Mr. Hegseth has failed as yet to demonstrate that he will pass this test. That was Mitch McConnell there demonstrating why he's a no vote on Pete Hegseth. So far in this statement, and I've gone through it, he doesn't talk as much about controversial elements of Hegseth's past or Hegseth's comments about women in combat, but instead he seems to indicate in this lengthy statement that he doesn't feel that Hegseth has the requisite experience to lead the Department of Defense. But nonetheless, Phil, we saw J.D. Vance cast that tie-breaking vote. Hegseth will lead the Department of Defense.
All right, and I want to get some reaction on that. I want to bring Amanda and Matt back into the conversation. This went the way it seemed it was going to go, even though we had a little bit of a surprise there, sort of surprise from Mitch McConnell. I'm wondering, Amanda, as Jay says, set him up and knock him down. They've already got the clock started on Kristi Noem and her nomination. Do you think what happened tonight sets a path for these nominees, sets an easier path for them?
Well, you saw a vote come through, and so it in some ways it does, because you now have the math and people were willing on such a tough candidate who people didn't feel were qualified, including Mitch McConnell. I think it is unfortunate that his letter, his conversation about, or his discussion, what is in that letter about his worries and concern about this candidate should have been expressed before. I mean, this is the kind of important conversation that usually senators have prior to the vote because it's supposed to be a discussion. Now, I think people were willing to give Trump the benefit of the doubt and his nominee the benefit of the doubt. We will see. It's likely to mean the other candidates are going to come through pretty easily because of that, because this one was one of the harder ones. I'll just make one other point, though. If you have senators who are looking at the full breadth of our intelligence, you might say, okay, we let Pete through, but we're going to take another look at Tulsi Gabbard because we want to make sure that we are very comfortable in that role given this nomination now.
And Matt, what about that? Amanda makes the point that it would have been nice for Mitch McConnell to maybe get that statement out and bring some people on board that way. It seems like he chose pretty specifically not to do that. I'm wondering why you think he did it that way.
Very intentionally, I think, to do a couple things. Number one, if you look at the last line of his statement, he even alludes to the fact that he knew he wasn't going to be able to stop him. He mentions about Hegseth yet hasn't done what he needed to do, alluding there was a future that he could prove it and that he would be confirmed as secretary. I think plainly, again, it goes back to my point. He obviously timed it with Tillis to take some pressure off him. Think of it this way. If McConnell comes out, say last night or earlier today, and says he's going to vote it against Hegseth, suddenly Tom Tillis is ground zero for the battle. It depends with him. And so it takes, by doing this after Tillis, takes pressure off him for being the sole decider of this, and in many ways takes a little heat off him in a contentious Senate race next year.
And Matt, Amanda has a really interesting point. Does this perhaps give someone the ability to, on, say, a Tulsi Gabbard, who comes in with a different set of baggage, does it give someone the ability to then say, hey, to the White House, I said yes to Hegseth, but I can't do this? Do you think that happens, or do people just fall in line here?
Look, the people that were going to say no to the White House, again, barring any surprises, were the people who voted no and said no to the White House this time. But again, RFK, Tulsi, and Kash Patel haven't had their hearings yet. So that will be very interesting to see. Again, we'll see what comes up. If there's any gaffes, any issues there, that could change things. But it also goes back to the point Amanda made and I made earlier, where kind of the bank of reservoir of voting no on these things, especially if you're Susan Collins, you're even Lisa Murkowski, is not endless. You can't vote against all four. You can't. It's a fact. Maybe one, certainly. Maybe two. Then you're pushing it. That's something to think about, too.
Amanda, how do the Democrats move forward? And I don't mean the bigger conversation about what happened to the Democratic Party after the election, but I mean moving forward and working with a Pete Hegseth, who no Democrat in the Senate voted for. Obviously, as you mentioned, they want this person to succeed because he's running the Defense Department for this country. But how does it become tricky when more and more of these nominees get in that the Democrats just don't want to work with?
Listen, I think what you're going to find is people take their role of oversight quite seriously and will be watching. And I think that's true, actually, not just because this vote was so close, not just for Democrats, but Republicans who also took some long time or they didn't share exactly their angst. I think this nominee is going to be watched very closely because people are worried exactly about what McConnell said. And it does behoove all of us that they began to build a relationship with them to help either guide, advise, support. But it's important that this role, this particular position is successful and that the relationship becomes a productive one from here on out.
And Matt, how receptive to that kind of oversight do you think President Trump and the White House will be?
I mean, look, oversight's a part of their job. Hegseth knows that. And like I said, this is done once he's confirmed. But that being said, again, it's done. So Hegseth also shouldn't hold this against people that voted against him, whether they're Democrats or also Republicans, right? Up in Maine, there are some military installations that he needs to pay attention to that Susan Collins it represents. So I think, look, it behooves both sides to leave this alone, and oversight will happen as it should, and you move on.
All right. Well, we'll see what happens with the other nominees. It's not just the Senate working this weekend. Jay and I will be working this weekend as well. Amanda, Matt, thank you both very much. Appreciate it. And a good evening to all of you. If you're just joining us, I'm Phil Lipoff in for Linsey Davis tonight. Thanks so much for streaming with us. Just moments ago, the Senate narrowly confirmed President Trump's controversial pick for Secretary of Defense, former Fox News host Pete Hegseth.
The yeas are 50 and the nays are 50. The Senate being equally divided, the Vice President votes in the affirmative, and the nomination is confirmed.
That was Vice President J.D. Vance reading the vote, also casting the tie. Vance was called on to cast the tie-breaking vote for the first time in his vice presidency. After former Republican leader Mitch McConnell joined fellow Republicans Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins, the voting against Hegseth, all the Senate Democrats voted no. Hegseth is now cleared to lead the Pentagon with the narrowest of support from Capitol Hill, as you just saw. I want to bring back in Jay O'Brien. Jay, walk us through how all this came together tonight.
Yeah, Phil, we always knew that there were two no votes against Pete Hegseth, Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, two moderate Republican senators, but we weren't sure if there were any others. And then at the 11th hour, as that vote is underway, the cameras captured Mitch McConnell, the former Senate Republican leader, now a prominent senator still and an influential senator of Kentucky, walking up, casting his vote, putting his thumb down and saying that he too was a no on Pete Hegseth. Now, McConnell saying that he had concerns about Hegseth's fitness for that job, about his level of experience. Murkowski and Collins said they had similar concerns, but also said they were worried about Pete Hegseth's background, about accusations, for instance, of sexual assault from 2017, which Hegseth denies, about Hegseth's previous comments about opposing women in combat, which Hegseth has since walked back. All of that to say a dramatic moment there. Mitch McConnell tying it up 50-50. And then, as you saw, J.D. Vance, the vice president, having to walk into the Senate chamber, cast the tie-breaking vote, his first tie-breaking vote as vice president just days into the job, and confirming Pete Hegseth to be the next Secretary of Defense, Phil.
It's a big job, and I'm wondering what you think this means for Pete Hegseth. 3 million people in the Defense Department. Clearly, just like the split in the Senate, not all of them are going to be happy about his appointment. What happens? What happens with Pete Hegseth as head of that department?
He takes the reins, Phil, of the nation's largest employer, as you said, 3 million people, including active duty service members, reservists, as well as civilians who work for the Department of Defense. And one of the things that those 3 Republicans in opposition to him, as well as every single Democrat, have pointed out in talking about their opposition to Pete Hegseth, is that he's never run an organization even nearly of that size. But Pete Hegseth said he's ready to do it. He champions the fact that he's an outsider and he can bring that outsider perspective to the Pentagon to bring back what he says is the quote-unquote warrior ethos that the organization needs. But he's got a tall order put out for him because he's promising substantive changes at the Department of Defense, substantive changes that President Trump wants. Now it remains to be seen if he'll be able to pull that off, Phil.
And just quickly, Jay, what's next for the confirmations? The Senate's working this weekend.
Yeah, the Senate's trying to move quickly through these Trump nominees, Phil. They've got a vote for Kristi Noem, Trump's pick to run the Department of Homeland Security, teed up for very early Sunday morning around 4 a.m. And then they're going to breeze through a series of controversial cabinet selection hearings, confirmation hearings, rather, this week, including Tulsi Gabbard, Donald Trump's pick to be the Director of National Intelligence, Kash Patel, Donald Trump's pick to run the FBI, and RFK Jr., Donald Trump's pick to run the Department of Health and Human Services. All have promised serious overhauls to their agencies and roles, expected to get grilled by lawmakers this week about all of that, Phil.
All right, Jay, thanks. We know you'll be covering it all for us. Joining me now is ABC contributor Amanda Renteria, who is a Democratic strategist, CEO of Code America. Also, Matt Gorman, former senior communications advisor to Senator Tim Scott. Thank you both for being back. Amanda, I want to start with you. We just saw, you just watched with us, Vice President J.D. Vance cast that tie-breaking vote to confirm Pete Hegseth for Defense Secretary. I'm wondering if there's anything about this evening's events that surprised you.
Really, McConnell's late vote, as well as his pretty scathing statement and concern that he's actually expressing about Pete's leadership here. That's unusual to hear from a former Senate Majority Leader. And also just that the White House, Vance, Vice President J.D. Vance wasn't ready for it. Usually those kinds of things are worked out beforehand so that everybody knows the dance and that there's no embarrassment and there's no waiting until the middle of the night in order to have someone come in for a late-minute vote. So that was a surprise to me. But I have a feeling that in this administration and really this last week, we're going to see a heck of a lot more surprises, given the speed with which people are moving and the unusual nature of a lot of these candidates that we're going to now see come one at a time, maybe even over the weekends.
Matt, we've heard a lot of back and forth from both Democrats and Republicans on why they would or wouldn't support him. What stuck out to you when you were reading about the various reasons senators said that they wouldn't vote for his confirmation?
I mean, look, I thought, McConnell's statement was pretty long, pretty scathing. And again, that was probably the one surprise. At the end of the day, again, it didn't change anything. Vance was there ready to go with the tiebreaker. I think the length at which he did it, I thought was surprising to me. Collins' statement talking about not just she opposed him, but didn't believe him, I thought was an interesting tact as well. Those two really stuck out at me, and not just why they voted against it, but in some ways very acute reasons why they voted against Hegseth.
Amanda, despite a slew of allegations of sexual misconduct, excessive drinking, the Senate, with the help, obviously, the tie-breaking vote, Vice President J.D. Vance, still confirmed Hegseth as Secretary of Defense. I'm wondering if you think this says anything about the Senate as an institution, or perhaps where it is at this moment, or just the political climate that we're living in.
Well, I think it says a couple of things. One is Trump is using the momentum from the election and really pushing as fast as he can. And that really does make it difficult for a Senate body that is used to taking some time to think through this, having discussions and deliberations. And so I think the strategy here, if you think about it from that perspective, was different, and it worked to bring forward a candidate that you can feel and see that people have had a lot of anxiety about. That's going to be somewhat of a message to how does this administration move forward? Are they using different and unusual tactics, and does it work? So I think this particular evening, this particular week, is really setting the stage that this is a different era of governing. This is a different era of the relationship between the Senate and the White House, given the closeness of this vote. And we're going to see what that means for how this body, Senate body, interacts with the White House as it moves forward.
And Matt, you and Amanda both have talked about that bank of no votes. You only have so many you can go to politically. I want to talk to you about political capital. This president has said, and by the numbers, comes into office in his second term as, with a mandate and with the support of the majority of this country, or at least those who voted. And I'm wondering what you think, how far this kind of political capital will go. Say it goes through all the rest of his nominees. How far, at what point do you have to start showing results before you've spent your political capital?
I mean, to kind of start, political capital is really only spent on actual policy priorities, right? It's not, you don't waste it, you don't really gain it on nominees. For example, Bill Clinton went through 2 attorneys general nominees, failed before getting the third. It didn't really affect how he got what he needed to done in his first term. So what will be really be determinative for the Trump term will be what he can get through on immigration, taxes, and the economy, whether that's 1 bill or 2. And that will really be how at least the first year, maybe the first 2 years, are candidly judged.
All right, Matt, thanks very much. Matt and Amanda, I appreciate it. I do just want to read you this. We've got a statement in from President Trump. He was asked about it, and he said, and I'll quote him, "We just heard that we have a great Secretary of Defense. We're very happy about that, and we appreciate everyone's votes." He was asked what he thought about Mitch McConnell voting no, and his response was, "I didn't know that. I just know we won. I didn't know that." So at the end of the day, he and his team at the White House are obviously very happy about this. Again, Amanda and Matt, thank you both very much for joining us tonight. President Trump just left California tonight after touring fire damage. He and First Lady Melania Trump went into impacted neighborhoods. You see some of the pictures here, shook hands with people who were impacted. At a press conference, President Trump declared that the fires are a national emergency.
I don't think you can realize how rough it is, how devastating it is until you see it.
About an hour earlier, President Trump touched down in Los Angeles and was greeted by Governor Gavin Newsom. As you see here, the two men shaking hands. The two have a long history. It's a war of words, but of course, from a distance, opposite sides of the country. Today, the two spoke face to face.
Most importantly, thank you for being here. It means a great deal to all of us, and not just the folks in Palisades, the folks in Altadena that were devastated. We're going to need your support. We're going to need your help.
Trump has threatened to withhold disaster aid if California fails to meet certain conditions. The president flew directly from Asheville, North Carolina, where many are still, as you know, recovering from the devastation left behind by Hurricane Helene. While in North Carolina, he pledged support for hurricane recovery, but also signaled he may make major changes to FEMA or perhaps even eliminate it if he could. ABC's Melissa Adan is in Pacific Palisades, where she spoke to a lawmaker in the room during that President Trump roundtable.
Phil, a big emphasis on President Trump's visit here to Southern California was on rebuilding. That's something that Trump says when he spoke to homeowners, they brought up questions as to how long will the rebuilding process take. He says that there was a couple he spoke to that said 18 months is what they were hearing. And he brought that up to Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass. And when they did that, they had a back and forth there that Karen Bass is vowing to cut the red tape as well. This is something that Trump says he wants to do. He says he's already been on the phone with developers wanting to get them here immediately to start building ASAP. However, as the Los Angeles mayor pointed out, right now there's already in several phases of this process, which has involved the EPA clearing out these hazardous waste materials, then making sure they can remove the debris. And then after that, they're looking at the basic rebuilding process. However, local officials here are also worried by that. They don't want it to be a year and a half for rebuilding. They want this to be as quick as possible. Representative Judy Chu, she represents the areas of Altadena and Pasadena. They were impacted by the Eaton fire. I spoke with her about this and what concerns her residents are right now facing. We're joined now by Judy Chu. She's a representative of areas in Altadena and Pasadena that were impacted by the Eaton fire. That is just where so many thousands of families have been impacted and are now trying to work to rebuild, move forward. But it is a long road ahead. You were inside the meeting right now with President Trump. What was your reaction and the message that you got across?
I wanted to make sure that President Trump did not forget Altadena and Pasadena. I do give him credit because he gave his all in terms of coming here within 3 days of his inauguration. And I know that it was so important for him to acknowledge the wildfires and to see the devastation for himself. But I wanted to make sure he knew how special Altadena and Pasadena was, and that the devastation there was apocalyptic. I mean, 9,500 structures burned, 17 people died, thousands of people are without homes, and they need help. And so I said to him, we need the disaster aid. We need to make sure that people can rebuild and that this community can be the wonderful place it once was.
And Representative Chu, what are the biggest issues and obstacles that your residents tell you they're facing right now?
Well, right now, they are just getting through the FEMA disaster assistance process. Initially, the biggest problem was getting these non-approval notices from FEMA. We complained about it on their behalf, and they said that they have changed this system now so that it more accurately says we need more information on your insurance or something like that. But then we're getting into the debris removal process. And right now, EPA is going through the hazardous removal. But debris removal will be a whole other issue. And we need to make sure that they get the funds that they need to do that. And then there's the whole rebuilding process. And I think that's where we are going to need that federal assistance as they go through this. And I want to make sure that our Altadena and Pasadena folks can learn from the lessons of Paradise. In this briefing here, some representatives were there, and it was encouraging to hear their stories about how they're rebuilding.
Is this something you'd say, Representative Chu, that you have not seen during your time representing Altadena and Pasadena? Obviously, a natural disaster to this gravity is historical, right? This is Southern California's most devastating wildfire. But the response, how is that?
And by the way, I think this will be one of the worst disasters in our nation's history. It could be the worst disaster in terms of damage done. So yeah, it's unprecedented, and that's why it is more urgent than ever that we all work together.
Very good. Well, thank you so much, Representative Chu, for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, and our thanks to you, Melissa. For more on the president's plans for FEMA, we're joined by former FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell. She oversaw the agency under the Biden administration. Deanne, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it. We are learning that President Trump is expected to sign an executive order to establish a task force charged with reviewing FEMA. But the idea of needing some reform in the agency is not really new. Managers under both Democratic and Republican administrations have suggested changes for some time. Explain where these issues are and what you think should be done.
Phil, FEMA has obviously been around for a very long time, but I would say that the role that we play in helping people before, during, and after disasters has continued to grow year after year, with an increase in the number of severe weather events that we're responding to, with our efforts to try to build resilience before a disaster happens, and then with the complex recoveries, once they do happen. And so there's always opportunity to continue to improve, and I think having somebody come by and take a look at it is not a bad thing. But I think that it's important to start the conversation with really understanding what FEMA's role is also at the same time.
Project 2025, the Republican administration's plan produced by the Heritage Foundation, calls for a disaster deductible, reducing federal aid to states that fail to protect their communities against disasters. Interestingly, a similar idea was actually proposed by the Obama administration. Do you see any kind of merit in it?
Well, I think that we've had these conversations, as you said, back to the Obama administration, of when we've seen this increase in the number of disasters that we are supporting financially, is there a better way to do that? And I think this is definitely a conversation that needs to happen, but it needs to happen with governors. It needs to happen with the state directors, those that are relying on the support that FEMA provides, on the ability for FEMA to help coordinate the rest of the federal family, to understand where the challenges are. And I think my concern is that if we rush into something like this, those jurisdictions, those states that don't have as much capability as others will then not recover the way they should, and then they just become more vulnerable to future events.
I'm guessing you saw that in North Carolina today, the president was critical, to say the least, of FEMA's response under your watch. Wondering what your response is to that.
I think, again, there's just a general misunderstanding of the role that FEMA plays. During the response to Hurricane Helene, there was quite a bit of misinformation out there about FEMA not being on the ground, about FEMA not delivering commodities, all of which have been proven to be false. Again, I think that the conversation that needs to happen is recognizing the role that FEMA plays, and that's to coordinate the federal family, and that's to reimburse jurisdictions for the costs that they experience and incur as they're rebuilding, and being there right by the side of the governor and their teams as they're going through these disaster responses and recoveries.
And I'm just curious, finally and quickly, the president suggested today that he might even just get rid of FEMA somehow. Do you think that is the right move?
Well, who's going to do the coordination? Like, these federal agencies don't show up on their own. These federal agencies, like the Army Corps of Engineers, they show up because somebody is sitting next to the governor and says, I have a need. And then FEMA's able to mission assign them and bring them in. That's not going to happen organically. And so if FEMA's not going to be there to coordinate it, who is going to do that? And so I think those are the types of conversations that need to happen.
Understood. Former FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Phil.
And while the president was visiting both of those disaster areas, his promised immigration crackdown got underway with troops arriving at the border and immigration raids in major cities nationwide. Here's Chief Global Affairs Correspondent Martha Raddatz.
Tonight, for the first time, U.S. military aircraft flying undocumented migrants out of the country as President Donald Trump launches his deportation campaign. The White House releasing these pictures, dozens of migrants in chains boarding C-17 aircraft. The flights landing in Guatemala carrying roughly 160 people, men and women.
Deportation's going very well.
Today, the Trump administration's new border czar, Tom Homan, telling me it's only the beginning.
Is that going to be a constant commitment from the U.S. military every single day to take deportees out?
Yes.
This as the military buildup on the border escalates. 1,500 active duty personnel, Army and Marines deploying. Their mission to support enhanced detection and monitoring efforts and repair and replace physical barriers. ABC's Matt Rivers on the ground in San Diego.
So right now these Marines are offloading concertina wire. They're going to bring it right down to the border to reinforce it. It's clearly meant to be a deterrent against future migration. And these kinds of supply flights, we might see a lot more of them over the coming months.
Far from the border, ICE raids and arrests in cities across the country in the days since the president was sworn in, some of them likely long planned, but a clear sign of what's to come. Boston, New York, and Newark, New Jersey. Newark's mayor saying agents raided a small business without a warrant, detaining American citizens in the process.
People were fingerprinted. Pictures of their IDs and face were taken there. When I got this information, I was appalled.
The Trump administration releasing numbers showing 538 arrests over the past 24 hours. The White House saying they're initially targeting undocumented immigrants who have committed violent crimes. But Homan acknowledges not everyone swept up in the raids fits that profile. And he has a stark warning to anyone who's in the country illegally.
So is this what we will see every single day, ending in what the president has promised is millions and millions being deported?
Yes, but you're going to see the numbers steadily increase, the number of arrests nationwide as we open up the aperture. Right now it's concentrating public safety threats, national security threats. That's a smaller population.
So after you do that, then you go after everybody who is there illegally.
If you're in the country illegally, you're on the table, because it's not okay to, violate laws of this country. So if you're in the country illegally, you got a problem. And that's why I'm hoping those who are in the country illegally who have not been ordered removed by the federal judge should leave.
And Martha joins us now. Martha, what are you hearing more about where these ICE agents may conduct raids moving forward?
Well, at this point, Phil, they can go into schools, they can go to churches, but Homan was very clear that those committing violent crimes will be deported first, and acknowledges that this show of force, these strong warnings to all undocumented immigrants, are meant to send a message that they should self-deport, since it would take a very long time and massive amounts of manpower and money to deport an estimated 11 million undocumented immigrants. Phil?
Martha Raddatz from Washington, D.C. tonight. Martha, thank you. Overseas tonight, the new hostage and prisoner exchange to tell you about. Hamas set to release 4 Israeli soldiers, and Israel expected to free about 200 Palestinian prisoners. The difficult images, of course, on both sides. Tom Sufi Burridge reports from Israel tonight.
This is the chilling video. Bloodied female Israeli soldiers taken hostage by Hamas during the October 7th attack. And tonight, 4 of them are just hours away from coming home. Hamas saying it will free Karina Ariev, Daniela Gilboa and Naima Levy, all 20 years old, as well as 19-year-old Liri Albag tomorrow. Naima's mother pleading for this moment.
I just want to be back home and have Naima back home.
33 hostages, including 2 Americans, are expected to be freed in the first phase of the deal during a 6-week truce. In exchange, Israel is to release another 200 Palestinian prisoners tomorrow. With the ceasefire holding, families inside Gaza returning home to staggering destruction. Mahmoud Abul Dawfa says the bodies of his wife and all 5 of his young children are still under the rubble of his bombed-out home. I hope I can bring them out, he says, and bury them.
Tom joins us now from Jerusalem. Tom, how is this exchange between Israel and Hamas going to be choreographed tomorrow?
Yeah, Phil, if all goes to plan, those 4 Israeli hostages could be freed as early as tomorrow morning. They should be transferred out of Gaza and to a hospital. Once they're out, then Israel is expected to start releasing those 200 Palestinian prisoners, some of whom have been convicted of serious crimes, including murder, from Israeli prisons. Phil?
All right, Tom Sufi Burridge from Jerusalem tonight. Tom, thank you. Here at home, Dr. Anthony Fauci, who served, as you know, as the nation's top infectious disease official during the COVID-19 pandemic, had his government security protection revoked, we're being told. Dr. Fauci, who President Trump has long been critical of, had previously expressed concerns to Congress over death threats he had received. Dr. Fauci has reportedly now hired his own personal security. President Trump says he does not take responsibility if something to those whose security has been stripped from happens. Opening statements began today in the trial of rapper A$AP Rocky, who's accused of assault connected to a 2021 shooting in Los Angeles. The prosecution presented maps, 911 calls, surveillance camera footage to the jury. The defense said the charges hinge on a fabricated story. A$AP Rocky is charged with 2 felony counts of assault with a semi-automatic firearm, accused of firing at a former friend and music collaborator. The rapper has pleaded not guilty. Artificial intelligence is quickly growing in usage and in function, and the new Trump administration is taking a new approach to the powerful technology. President Trump signing an executive order on artificial intelligence that will revoke past government policies his order says act as barriers to American AI innovation. Our next guest is a professor of engineering and law at UCLA, as well as the founder of the UCLA Institute for Technology, Law, and Policy, Professor John Villasenor. Professor, thanks for taking the time. We appreciate you speaking with us.
Thank you very much.
Trump reversed Biden's executive order that placed some guardrails on the evolving technology. How important do you think that is to the industry?
Well, I think generally we're going to see the Trump administration taking a much more hands-off approach to AI regulation than we saw in the Biden administration. And I think his decision to revoke that October 2023 executive order from the Biden administration is part of that process.
What were some of the guardrails?
I'm sorry?
What were some of the guardrails?
Well, there were some obligations with respect to reporting, if, for example, the security protections that were used to protect model weights and things like that to the government. And so that's now been revoked. And I think the new administration is, I would expect, taking a kind of step back and probably would take a more of a clean slate approach to figuring out how and in what manner they want to approach AI regulation.
Does it concern you at all that people outside of the administration are advising the president on AI policy that are also the ones who might gain the most from it financially?
Well, I think any administration is going to seek input from people both inside the administration as well as people who are working in the areas that are potentially affected by the regulation. And as long as the administration or any administration takes a balanced view of all the input, I think there's a really good opportunity to create good policy. So I think the fact that the administration is seeking input from a broad range of sources isn't inherently problematic.
Professor, knowing what you know about the industry, not asking you to take a political stance here, but is one administration's way of dealing with AI better than the other, or is a combination of both the best? What do you think?
I'm actually more optimistic about AI under this administration than I was under the Biden administration. And the reason is the Biden administration had a very sort of fear-based approach to AI regulation, whereas I think the Trump administration has a more, I think, properly balanced approach in terms of understanding that incredible benefits, but also, of course, being aware that, like with any technology, there are going to be some downsides.
And lastly, where do you think AI and large language model technology will be, say, in the next 3 to 5 years? What do you think we can expect?
You know, I think we can expect the unexpected. I don't think 5 years ago any of us expected to see the extraordinary capabilities that we're seeing today that are now in the hands of anybody who wants it, at least in terms of large language models. And so if we've learned anything, it's that predicting the future is really hard, especially when it comes to AI.
Maybe AI will be able to predict the future better than us at some point.
We'll see about that. But it's going to be, you know, this administration is coming in at an absolutely foundational time, incredible importance for AI. So there's going to be a lot of very important developments in the next couple of years.
All right. We know you'll be following it. We will too. Professor John Villasenor, thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
And that's our show. I'm Phil Lipoff. Stay with ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. Thanks for streaming with us.
America.
Good morning, America.
Good morning, America.
Are you ready? They are ready. Covering the biggest events in the country right now.
There's a lot going on here this morning. You don't just see it, you feel it.
I'm in.
I'm in. I'm in too.
I'll be here.
I am here and so happy.
I'm in. I'm in too.
Michael, George, Clara,
Ginger.
This family is suffocating. We are all here to help them.
We're going to make this happen.